IB Nation, we are back. It is Friday. It is October 7th, Ryan. I don't know what it's like in New Jersey, but I just walked outside. I got a nice, kind of the whiff of the cold fall air, and it's like, oh, it is now officially football season because for the first time all year, I have felt fall weather, and that means it's jeans and hoodie time, man. So I am fired up. That is football season for me. But even more importantly, Ryan, we're a day away from Notre Dame taking on number 16 BYU in what is a huge game for the Fighting Irish. And we're going to kind of put our finishing touches on our analysis of this game and make our predictions. I'm going to save it because Ryan doesn't even know what I'm going to say on this, but we have a very interesting view on our predictions and then on what we think may actually happen. So we're going to have some fun with this, Ryan, but I think it bears sort of repeating the importance of this game for Notre Dame. You're 2-2 coming out of the break. You've got some momentum. You're a win over BYU away from really going on a roll because Notre Dame they'll beat Stanford. They'll beat UNLV. They should beat Syracuse. You've got a chance to really kind of get hot going into that Clemson game on November 5th. That's what happens if you beat BYU. You also get the first win, your ranked win of the Marcus Freeman tenure. You do it away from home. You've now won back-to-back games away from Notre Dame Stadium. The perception about this program starts to change. All of those are positives. Lose this game, and the exact opposite happens. It's not just you had a bad day against Marshall. Now it's this team has serious problems. And I think that the black eye that they suffered yesterday with Jacob Lacey transferring, coupled with 2 days later losing to a BYU team that is a good football team, but not one that should beat Notre Dame. There's a lot at stake, and this season is going to go sharply in a different one of two directions after this football game, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, we talked about it a ton going into the North Carolina game. Like, you want to go into the bye week feeling good about yourselves, but that doesn't really matter if you leave the bye week feeling bad about yourself, right? Like, that's the preparation that Notre Dame has kind of underdone during the bye week and coming out of that first real break, if we're going to call it a break, even though they're still practicing for a little bit there, to hit into that sweet spot of the schedule, to the middle of the section where you're going to have Clemson down the road, you're going to have USC, but you have some winnable football games that are obviously coming up soon. So you need to play well in this full game. You need to come out of the bye week well because you need to set the table and set the standard for the rest of the season. I feel like we talk about standard as in like an overarching idea, right? Like this is the standard of the program. The standard also has to kind of change a little bit during the season. This is the standard for this week, coming off of a victory, coming off of a bye week. There's different layers to every game, which I think is the most fun part about football, honestly, outside of just playing on a Saturday or a Friday night. So it's going to be interesting. I'm excited for Notre Dame football to be back because it was fun watching ball last week, just kind of, without much care in the world. But I mean, obviously want to watch some Notre Dame football, want to watch some good stuff. So very important matchup because like you said, after this, Notre Dame has a lot of very winnable games. Yes. This is a tough opponent and they have to get their post bye week festivities off to a good start here.
Right. The post bye momentum is important. I mean, it's good to have momentum going into the bye, but all that momentum is gone if you lose this football game. And honestly, look, do I want Notre Dame to win and look like the team that they're supposed to be? Sure. But honestly, at this point in time, Ryan, I don't care. It just needs to be a win. Now, yes, there are some things that if they beat BYU by a field goal outside of BYU just playing out of their minds. And sometimes, I mean, Jaron Hall's just putting dimes against good coverage and BYU guys are just making great plays on the ball and, some breaks go their way and Notre Dame has to win on a last-second field goal. Okay, fine. Get a win, right? Yep. It'll show that I'm always say I'm process driven, right? And as a coach, I would be very frustrated coming out of that kind of game. But I'd say, hey, look, we got the win. We've got to clean some stuff up. I would always rather clean stuff up after a W than a loss. And I feel like Notre Dame has kind of already got there. They need to lose to get this out of their system type of thing. I also feel like some of the frustration that I have gathered, we have a big intel piece about the Jacob Lacey situation on the boardsandirishbreakdown.com. The reality is, Ryan, is there are some frustrations mounting, and that happens when you lose. And what I think is at the heart of a lot of it is, as much as we heard from players and parents and all those type of stuff about how much they disliked Brian Kelly, I think that when you have a loss like Marshall, the whole, well, yeah, I didn't like him, but starts to creep in,
Sure.
right? And I think that's what's happened a little bit is they see the stuff on Twitter, they hear the things, oh, inexperienced head coach and all this other kind of stuff. And then you start to have that stuff kind of creep in. Then something like this situation with Jacob Lacey happens. Then you go out and lose a football game, and that's how you can lose control of your football team.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite is true. If you win this football game, it gives Marcus Freeman and his staff a chance to say, hey, guys, look, we don't like what happened here. From what I'm told, Marcus Freeman did not criticize Jacob Lacey, rip Jacob Lacey. He was like, look, we don't like it, but we're going to move on, right?
Yep.
And they've said nothing but nice things to Jacob. They wanted him to stay, and so I think they handled it well from that standpoint. But now you got to show this football team like, hey guys, no, not everything has gone our way so far this year, but trust the process.
Mm-hmm.
But trusting the process requires results, Ryan. And so I've always said you can't be results driven. You have to be process driven. But if the process isn't ending with W's, then there's going to be doubt in the process. And so that's why I think it's just really, really important that Notre Dame get a win in this game and continue that momentum and just I think it puts behind you. I think if they beat this game, Ryan, I dare say, I think that you can look at it and say, I can feel like I can put the Marshall game now in the rearview mirror at this point in time. What say you about that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, because I think again, you're moving forward, right? Like nothing is going to do. It's not going to do anybody any good to kind of dwell in the past on the negatives that have happened, right? So we want to move forward and to be able to take the next step. I agree with you, and I like your note on the process stuff too, Brian, because I've talked about that a lot, just with people generally, that if the results aren't there, then you need to change your process, right? Like you need to adapt in order to have the best process, in order to have positive outcomes, right? So I think that there was some hiccups early. I hope that the staff has been smart enough, because I know they're all really smart people and they're all good people. And I know that I'm sure that they have had some self-reflection opportunities, especially during the bye week and even before that, right? To see this is what's working for us. This is what hasn't worked up until this point. This is what we need to change. This is how we need to adapt. And I think that we're going to see a lot of those elements. And I'm excited, man, just for football, because, I mean, after your Broncos laid a goose egg last night in a very ugly fashion, you need a big win this Saturday.
You know what? So. And that's exactly why I didn't watch the Broncos last night.
It's a good call,
I've
man.
not watched a second of this football team. There's a couple guys I follow on Twitter that are Broncos fans, and they're all hype. Oh, you got Russell Wilson and blah, 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 blah. And now they're losing their minds about how bad Russell Wilson. And I was like, did you not watch him last year? Did you not? I mean, the guy's like creepy. Guy's closer to 40 than he is 30 now, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm not shocked. And then they give him this big contract. It's like, this is exactly what I expected the Broncos to be, because this is what they are every year.
You know what's funny is the Seahawks are not a good team, but I feel like a lot of people just gave Russell Wilson all the credit. And I think Russell Wilson's an excellent football player, but Geno Smith looks pretty good right now.
I think Russell Wilson was an excellent football player.
Sure.
I just think he has the kind of body type that it's hard to really maintain the level of excellence through the age of 40, like you see from an Aaron Rodgers and a Peyton Manning and guys like that. His style of play is such that I just think it's harder to do that. But yes, to your point, need to see some good offensive football. There's no question about it, because that ultimately is going to be the thing that tells us if Notre Dame can truly go on a run that goes beyond Stanford, UNLV, and Syracuse. You're going to need the offense. I don't think they have to arrive like, aha, this is what we always dreamed the offense could be. Yeah, it'd be nice. It just needs to be progress, because you got a month to get ready for the Clemson game. It just needs to be progress. They can't have any steps back on offense, and that's going to be the key. Yep. So Ryan, let's we've broken down the game. We had our statistical matchup earlier in the week. We kind of talked about what's at stake for Notre Dame today. Earlier in the week, we did our keys to victory yesterday. So now it's prediction time, Ryan, and we're going to dive into sort of how we see this game playing. We made our predictions at irishbreakdown.com. You can see the article there. We also have made predictions for Tennessee and LSU. We've made predictions for Oklahoma and Texas, and we also made predictions for Kansas and TCU, which is one of the biggest games of the weekend. I started that article off with, raise your hand if you thought TCU and Kansas would be the biggest game of the Big 12. And I was like, And put your hands down, Coach Leopold and Coach Dykes. Anyone else? Nobody? I mean, who predicted this coming into the season?
I started my excerpt with the same thing, Brian. I'm just like, who would have thought that TCU and Kansas would be a big game 4 games into the season?
Yes.
You would not have guessed that one.
So we'll preview all those games at the end, but we have all those at irishbreakdown.com as well, sort of our predictions and those brief snippets. But what everybody came here for today, Ryan, was our predictions of the Notre Dame BYU game. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our prediction and give our score prediction and just kind of discuss how we see the game playing out. The second part of what we'll do is we'll kind of hand out, if what we think happens, who will be the game ball recipients, who will be the driving forces behind that, just having a little bit of fun with that from a prediction standpoint. And then the final piece, kind of looking back at our keys to victory yesterday, what are the things that we're most confident in that will happen? Now, those are all things that need to happen for Notre Dame to win and win the way they're capable of. But what are we most confident will actually happen? So that's what we're going to do today. So, Ryan, let's begin with your look at how you think what was your prediction score for this game, how you got to that score, and then also a little bit extra of what you and I were kind of talking about before the show started. I wanted to give some insight to the folks about what kind of goes through our minds as we're doing these things.
Brian, the reason I love kind of how we build up to the end of the week is that as I watch more and more film and I kind of talk ball and talk it out with you a little bit, there are parts of the game that I become more positive with. There's more parts of the game that I become a little more negative, or that there's a little more of a question mark in my mind. So there's been a couple weeks that at the beginning of the week, I felt a totally different sense than I did at the end of the week. One was after the Marshall game against Cal, because I was just, you were down in the dumps, man. And the more you watch Cal, you were just kind of like, hey, man, like they're a tough defense. Like they might give Notre Dame a little bit of problems. And I think that both of our predictions for the Cal week were actually pretty spot on, As I watch more and more of BYU over this year and just kind of evaluate where Notre Dame's strengths are, where BYU's weaknesses are, where BYU's strengths are, where Notre Dame's questionable areas, I ended up picking in this game Notre Dame to win 31-20, because I think that there's a lot of good parts to this BYU team. Jaron Hall is a really talented quarterback, though I think is going to give Notre Dame a couple fits at times, where you're just like, got him. Oh, he's out of the pocket. He extends the play for a nice throw, right? And there's guys on the defensive side of the football that I think are good football players, like Ben Bywater and Caleb Hayes at cornerback, who I think are going to have the potential to give Notre Dame a little bit of problems at times. But I'll be very honest about this one. And my inkling has not really failed me in the past, so I'm okay with putting it out in the universe. I picked 31-20, but the more homework I do on this and the more I watch BYU, I think Notre Dame can run away with this one, man. Like, I would not be shocked if Notre Dame ends up winning by 20-plus points in this game. Like, I think that Notre Dame is just much more talented than BYU, and BYU is weak in certain spots that BYU is weak in certain spots, Brian, that coming into the game, I thought that they would be stronger in. Coming into the season, I thought that they would be stronger in. So I am predicting a 31-20 victory, but I am getting a little cautious because I think Notre Dame might even be better than I'm giving them credit for. I think they might be heading in the better direction, and I think that Notre Dame has a chance to have a very convincing win on Saturday.
Ryan, it's kind of interesting that you say that, because you and I are kind of looking at this in two completely different ways a little bit. For me, I look at it and I the way that I kind of do predictions is I kind of go with what the game should be. I went 38-20. And the reason is because of those matchup advantages that Notre Dame has. I mean, I think that when you look at Notre Dame, they should win the battle in the trenches on both sides of the ball. They should be able to get their ground game going, which should open up opportunities to get the ball in space in the passing game. They should be able to out-leverage BYU on the perimeter. They should be able to shut down the BYU run game. They should be able to keep the BYU receivers in check, because that's been a strength of this Notre Dame football team. The area where BYU is the best thing about their entire football team is their pass game. Yep. Notre Dame has already faced two teams that have a better passing game, and they held both of them in check. I mean, they held C.J. Stroud to 227 yards, something around there, right? Mm-hmm. They held Drake May threw for 301, but like 140 that came on two passes when the game was basically over, And so, they had 215 yards on 4 completions, 2 of which, like I said, were when the game was in doubt. So That's been the strength of this football team. And so Notre Dame will have to not play well in areas that they have consistently played well so far this season to not win this game convincingly based on what the matchups are. I think that's where I am. However, the funny thing is, yes, I could see it being 38-20. Notre Dame kind of runs the clock out at the end, wins a convincing victory. I don't see it being over. It shouldn't be necessarily competitive for 4 quarters. I have the opposite approach, though, because I went with what should happen. And instead, but I kind of have that, but man, this team still has a lot to prove to me, and that's kind of, so like we look at it a little bit differently. Like I think this game could be a blowout. 38-20 is what I predicted. I could see it being 45-20. I could see it being 44-17. I could see the defense really shutting BYU down. I don't think that they will, but they could.
Yep.
They're capable of it. And I think the offense could get hot, and then Notre Dame really puts them away in the second half. I could see that, but I just can't predict it yet because there's still so much uncertainty about this football team. Drew Pine played great against North Carolina, but North Carolina is not very good on defense, right? And the defensive line dominated the North Carolina offensive line, but it's not a very good offensive line. Neither's Cal. And Marcus Freeman even said this week when he's talking about self-scouting. He's like, there's just such a small sample size. It's really hard, to get the bigger grasp that you would have if you had like a bye week at the end of October.
Right.
And so I think that's a very fair comment. So this team is capable. There's nothing about this football team that makes me say, you know what? I just don't think the talent is what I thought it should be. And as we said before the season, before Tyler Buckner got hurt, Drew Pine can beat a lot of football teams. If the talent around him plays to their potential and you give him time and you scheme to what he does well, Drew Pine can beat a lot of football teams. BYU is not one of the teams that we thought they might lose to if Drew Pine is your starting quarterback, right? It will require more than just Drew Pine not playing well. And so it should be a convincing win, but I'm still in a little bit of show me mode, Ryan, which is partly why I've emphasized this week so much on how important this game is, because I am still so very much in I know what this team could be, but what is this team going to be? I'm still there, Ryan, and I haven't quite got out of that. North Carolina helped. That game helped. The way that they controlled Carolina really for much of the game, even when the game was competitive early, you just kind of felt like Notre Dame's about to take off with this thing. You just felt good about where they were, but then they kind of don't put the team away and, stuff like that, which I can live with. I mean, it's not like the game was in doubt, but those are just the things that I look at, Ryan, and say, this is what should happen. What you said that you think is going to happen is exactly what should happen. I think you're spot on. I just am still, I got to see it, right? I've got to see it.
I think what's making me feel the way, though, Brian, like that maybe I'm overestimating, how close BYU can keep this football game, or how at the competitive level of this game, is just something that you said, actually. It's that where BYU's biggest strengths are what Notre Dame's playing pretty well against, wide receivers and passing game have not killed Notre Dame up to this point, right? Like it's been a couple plays here and there against North Carolina. Like that was kind of I think Notre Dame's, what we assume to be the weak points of their game have kind of been strengths in a lot of instances, right? Like the secondary has been a strength. The special teams has been a strength. When you look at BYU, they have a really nice passing game, but Notre Dame's secondary has been playing pretty well. The defensive line has been playing better over the last couple weeks. It's that weakness. I mean, that's strength for BYU. I just don't know how high of a strength or to what degree that strength will be. And then when you're talking about Notre Dame on the offensive side of the ball, I've seen some people in the chat, and I agree with you completely. Notre Dame's offense is still in a show me mode, 100%. Yes. I am not fully there like, Notre Dame figured it out. Not even close. It was a good step against North Carolina. Now let's do it against a better defense. Like that's where I am, right? So I'm not sitting here and saying that Notre Dame's going to score 40 points because I just think that they found it, they figured it out, all that type of stuff. When I watch BYU's film, I'm just like, look, their defensive line is not that great. They don't create a lot of pressure. That's what I really worry most about against Notre Dame's offense in general, is the ability for the offensive line to consistently pick up the pressure and for Drew Pine to be comfortable. And I don't think that they're going to make them incredibly uncomfortable. And the secondary, while I commented and said, like, and I agree, and I still believe this, that they're a really well coached and solid secondary. I don't think they're star studded, right? Like I don't think
Malik
that they're
Moore's
like the
not
second
playing in this game either. By the way.
exactly. So I don't think there's like these big play secondary players back there for BYU where like, oh man, a bad read, a late throw, and it's a pick six, like automatically, right? Like I don't think
Ryan,
that
can
the
I ask you a
strengths
question about
match up.
that?
Yeah.
They remind me a lot of Wisconsin's secondary last year, but not as good at corner, right? Like Wisconsin last year had a good, solid secondary that could keep points down against most teams. But at the end of the day, if they couldn't generate pressure on the quarterback, you could have success against them.
Yep.
And Notre Dame was getting open against Wisconsin last year enough to make some plays. We saw Drew Pine have some success leading down on some drives. And I would argue that this Notre Dame team should be in a better position than last year's Notre Dame team in that game because this year's Notre Dame team has shown that they're able to run the football, where early last season that team couldn't run the football and you could just play the pass.
Right.
So I look at it and I say, to your point, like I see everything that you see, Ryan. I'm with you. I watched the film and I'm like, man, this Notre Dame team should expose that. They should dominate that. Jaron Hall's a really good college quarterback. He's not Caleb Williams. He's not CJ Stroud. He's not players that they faced, Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence, guys that Notre Dame has had to face in the past.
I don't even think he's Drake May, if I'm being honest. Like I just
upside wise agree.
Yeah.
Where I'd like Jaron is he's experienced and savvy and those type of things. But to your point, yes, this is a game that Notre Dame should win. But every time I'm breaking down film, I start to get a little fired up about how much Notre Dame's going to dominate. You know what pops in my head? 26-21.
I get that.
The score of the Marshall game. I mean, we're not even a month away from the Marshall game yet. And so that's the thing that kind of comes back why I say I'm still in show me mode because I know how bad North Carolina is. Now, having said that, my score prediction for the North Carolina game last week was what, like 31-17? I think is what it was because I said, look, I can't predict a breakout from the offense until they show it to me. Well, they kind of showed it to me. They not only scored 45, but they had it 45 plus a fumble into the end zone. You missed a field goal. You missed a 4th and 1 opportunity. You got stopped on 4th and 1. You missed your tight end for what would have been a 60-yard touchdown, wide open up the sideline. I mean, you left a lot of points on the board, and that's a positive. I'm not saying that to criticize them. You need to execute those plays, but I feel like this team in the last 3 weeks is kind of what they screwed up against Marshall. We didn't see as much against Cal. The mistakes they made against Cal, we didn't see against North Carolina. Right, this team has built to a degree on offense, and if the offensive line plays the way they're capable of, then I think they should do all that. But I just keep going back to they have to show it to me, right? I'll tell you, like I won't be shocked at all or surprised at all if Notre Dame wins this game convincingly. I won't.
I wouldn't.
But I'm also not going to be shocked based on what we've seen the first 3 weeks of the season if this is a close football game. I mean, is BYU worse than Cal? No. And Notre Dame beat Cal by a touchdown in a game where Cal had a chance at the end of the game to tie it up with a Hail Mary.
Yep.
So I just need to see it. But if they do what you and I say they're capable of, Ryan, that is when you start to say, okay, this next month is going to be a lot of fun. And if they don't, then it's going to be like this next month is going to be not pleasant. Not pleasant at all for this football team. But I think they get it done.
I'll say this, Brian. I think the key for whether it is a really close football game or Notre Dame kind of distance themselves late is how fast of a start they get off to. Like, I really think that is very, very important for this game because we saw it again. Like you mentioned, Cal that ended 24-16, right? Part of the reason that it ended that score was because Notre Dame didn't kick into gear until the end of the second quarter going into the third quarter, right? Like they didn't play. They played really poor football the first quarter and a half. They got off to a slow start against Cal. Yeah.
Right.
So I think if they started fast against Cal, they run them out of the building a little bit, at least a couple touchdowns.
Or if they play the second half, if they play the whole game the way they did the second half, it's a 34-13 game.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, exactly. And then they carried that momentum into the North Carolina game offensively. Right. And so, yes, you are correct. It's going to be interesting. And the other thing is, this is still a team that you say, okay, one thing I'm confident in that gives me optimism that I'm at least going to get it right that Notre Dame wins, even though I don't know if the score prediction will be close to correct, is that with a young football team, an inexperienced football team, you worry about in an environment like this. You're in Las Vegas, a huge NFL stadium. It's like, like Jerry World. It's just an exotic stadium, all these other type of things. You're away from home. Ohio State is still yet to play a game away from home, right? Notre Dame's not in that situation. This is going to be your third game away from home. You've played in Columbus, which is one of the loudest environments in college football, one of the best environments in college football. You played at North Carolina, which the crowd there was incredibly disappointing, and Notre Dame kind of quieted them pretty early. But it's still away from home against a really good opponent, at least on one side of the ball. So the environment shouldn't be too much for them, Ryan, I don't think. And I like the fact that they didn't fly out till I think this morning to Las Vegas. So there's a better chance that your players are going to be locked in, because you're treating it like a normal road game instead of treating it like kind of a mini bowl game.
Like a vacation. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so I do think they'll at least be prepared for that.
Yep.
Right. And the other thing too, and somebody just mentioned this too, like Notre Dame is tested going into this game as well. But the counter to that is so is BYU. I mean, they did play Baylor. They did play Oregon. I would argue Notre Dame's a little bit more tested because they've also played Ohio State, North Carolina, Cal, and even Marshall is a test. I mean, if Marshall's probably the most inferior opponent Notre Dame has played so far. Yep. They're a 3-2 football team that beat Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. So they're at least tested, and I'm very curious to see how the attitude is coming out of the break. That's going to be a very, very interesting aspect of this. So let me ask you this. Well, let me quickly give just the scores I do want to give the scores that the other staff members had for this game, Ryan, just so everybody understands the entire scope of it. Vince and I were very close. I had 38-20. Vince had 37-20 in favor of Notre Dame. Ryan, you were 31-20. You were very close to Sean Davis, who went 31-21. So you and Sean were very close. Me and Vince and I were very close. Sean Stiers has it Notre Dame 38, BYU 24, and Andrew McDonough has the same score as Sean Davis, 31-21. And so, Ryan, you have now, after last week's success, you have risen up to a tie for second place in the standings. So
coming for you, sir. Coming for you.
Let's do it. Let's do it. I've had back-to-back undefeated weeks, which has helped me pull just a two-game lead. But we do have a couple. I think we have a couple differences this week, Ryan. I didn't actually look to see specifically where you were, but I think we have at least maybe one difference this week. I'd have to go look. Actually, we might actually have the same predictions this week. Let me see here. Where are you, Ryan? Ryan,
I think you're cheating.
No, I always make my picks before. No, I think this week, Ryan, I think we're on the same page. You and I have the same predictions for everybody. So there will be no distance gained or lost in this week's matchup because you and I.
I just have to pull squarely ahead of Vince though, so I'm in second by far.
There you go. Because I think you and Vince definitely had one prediction that was different. I believe. Nope. I think Vince also picked TCU. So yeah, we'll see. We'll just have to keep it rolling this week. I thought that the games that we picked would create a little bit more difference of opinion, but there's only one game that we actually had anybody had a difference of opinion. On the ones. It was the Kansas TCU game. It was the only one that anybody had anything different. I should have assumed that no one was going to pick Sean Davis and Sean Stiers and Andrew McDonough all picked Kansas. Then you and Vince all picked TCU. But I should have known that none of our staff were going to sell out and pick LSU. I should have known.
Not a chance.
I should have known. I should have known.
With how much of a Hendon Hooker fan I am on top of my LSU.
Oh, I knew you were going to pick Tennessee. I just thought somebody on the staff was going to pick LSU at home. So those are kind of where we are with those predictions, Ryan. But we'll get to those games in a little bit. I want to now wrap this up with kind of looking at the keys to victory. Yesterday, Ryan, during the show, we went through sort of the offensive keys to success on both sides of the ball. Offensively, we talked about starting fast. We talked about establishing the line of scrimmage, which also leads to early down success. We talked about big plays and then complementary players stepping up to make plays in this game. Defensively, we talked about controlling the line of scrimmage and making BYU one-dimensional. We talked about containing Jaron Hall, being disciplined, and being disruptive. So as you look at those things, Ryan, what are the things of those keys that you're most confident we will see play out on Saturday between Notre Dame and BYU?
This was a tough one, honestly, Brian, because there was a couple that I felt pretty good about, if I'm being honest. But I think the thing that I'm most confident about is I really think that Notre Dame has the advantage up front in this football game, right? So I think that Notre Dame establishing their dominance up front, I think, is something that I feel pretty confident about, because this is why I think that this is a little bit of a this is a different BYU team than I was anticipating, right? This is a team where what you usually typically think of a BYU team is very strong up front, good running game, kind of what we saw last year. This year, we have a passing attack. We have an offensive line that is more finesse than physical. They're a good offensive line, especially pass blocking wise, but not quite the physical unit that I thought. And then defensively, I think it's kind of the same, man. Like it's not this defensive line for BYU is not the long, super aggressive physical unit that I'm usually looking at. So I think I'm most confident that I think that Notre Dame is going to be able to, and this goes for both sides of the football. I think that they're going to come out and the offensive and defensive lines are going to kind of establish this football game. So I think up front, Notre Dame is going to win this game. And that's the one that I feel good about that one, just on paper and what I've seen on film too. So I feel pretty good about that right now.
I'm with you on the line of scrimmage. I'm confident that they're going to control the line of scrimmage. I am. As long as the defensive players kind of get their heads on straight after the Jacob Lacey situation, as long as they do that, then I think they're going to control the action on both sides of the line. I don't think that's enough to win just alone. I think that they have to make plays in the perimeter as well. So I agree with you. I think they will establish line of scrimmage on offense. I think they will have some first down success. Early down success. I think they will control the line of scrimmage and make BYU one-dimensional. I'm very confident in those things. The only other thing that right now I'm very confident in is I do think we're going to see some of the complementary players step up and make plays this week. I think BYU is going to have spent a lot of time game planning for Notre Dame, and they're going to say, hey, 87's not going to beat us, 4's not going to beat us, and we're going to have a plan for the running backs, which means Jaden Thomas, Braden Lindsey, Matt Salerno, hopefully Tobias Merriweather, and one of the maybe Logan Diggs is still kind of not quite gotten on to the level of Tyree and Estime from a number standpoint so far in the season, although he's coming off of an excellent performance against North Carolina. So guys like that are going to make some plays in this game if Notre Dame's going to win. And I'm not saying Mayer doesn't get shut out and Styles gets shut out, but those guys are going to make some really clutch plays, whether it's a third down, setting up a big drive, something like the Audric Estime block on Drew Pine scramble, just some kind of play where those guys are going to make 7, 8, 9 plays in this game that you look back. They may not be big plays, but they're going to be very important plays that I think are going to set up this football team. I think Matt Salerno's conversion was a third or fourth down, wasn't it? Like the one in the red zone. So it wasn't you look at the stat sheet and you're like, what, one catch for 7 yards? Well, that's a big catch.
It was a big catch. Really big
catch. Those are the things that you see and say, hey, look, I think those things will happen a little bit more even than we saw last week, which is going to help this football team. I think that's an important thing for down the stretch of this team getting going, because I think if that starts to happen, then all of a sudden maybe that takes the pressure off of Lorenzo Styles to feel like he has to be the guy. Mm-hmm. And if one of those complementary players is Braden Lindsey, then I think we will really see this team roll. I will say that, but I'm not quite ready to predict who it will be, just that it will be complementary players. Defensively, I think they'll be disruptive, and I think they'll control the line of scrimmage. I'm confident in those things. What I'm not confident in, that they'll be disciplined, not confident in that, and I'm not confident that they're going to contain Jaron Hall at this point. Yes, they did a better job after the first drive against Drake May, but we have a long history that goes way before Marcus Freeman was here of Notre Dame struggling with mobile quarterbacks. 3 good quarters of doing that doesn't mean that you've figured it out. I need to see that you've learned your lesson and you're going to apply it week after week. And so, that's something that I'm not quite confident in. I'm going to be very curious, because if they contain Jaron Hall, I'm going to feel a lot better about the matchup against DJ and Dracovic and Caleb Williams down the stretch.
Oh yeah.
And because if you can kind of keep Drake May and Jaron Hall in check in back-to-back games, and you've kept CJ Stroud sort of in check. Although, again, CJ made money plays that game. Yeah. Money plays.
Especially scrambling out of the pocket.
Oh, yes. And late, plays. Right? He showed me that he's like, okay, that's why I have him as the number 1 quarterback in the country, right? Yep. My point is, they didn't let him take that game over and rip you up the way he normally rips people up. That's my point.
Right.
And so they've done that so far with the 2 best quarterbacks they've played. If they can then do that in this next game against Jaron Hall, then I'm going to say, okay, this team has a chance to be a really, really good defense, Ryan. And I would even argue, look, Jack Plummer's had a pretty good year so far. Yeah. In his last 2 games since playing Notre Dame, he's gone 64% of his passes and 69.7 completion percent. He's had 245 and 273 yards, 8.8 and 8.3 yards per attempt. He was 7.1 and 7.7 yards per attempt in the 2 games before, completed 65.7 and 71.8% of his passes. And against Notre Dame, he was 43.2 for 184 yards, 5.0 yards per attempt. So even Jack Plummer, who's not on the same level as Drake May and those other guys, but he's still having a nice year. You kept him well below what he's done against other opponents. So again, outside the Marshall game, they've really done a great job keeping quarterbacks in check. This is going to be the toughest test, and one of the tougher tests since you've started the season with Jaron Hall. So I don't know if they're ready for that. But if they do, I'm going to start feeling really good about. Can you imagine what this defense is going to do? I'm getting ahead of myself. But if they do what we think they're going to do, I feel really bad for Tanner McKee because they have been facing quarterbacks that can move all year.
It's not Tanner.
And Tanner McKee is a statue. And it's just something like, oh, my goodness. They're going to – I feel bad for that kid. They're going to tee off on him a little bit. But let's get through this game first.
Yes.
So those are my 2 things, Ryan. Now, game balls. Right? We're going to predict some game balls. So also a feature we're going to start doing on the post-game show is we're going to hand out game balls right at the beginning. We're going to go around the staff and hand out game balls for the game. We'll find out if we're in the mood to hand them out. We may take the Marcus Freeman approach that we don't give out game balls in a loss in the show. We'll have to see, but we'll definitely do it with a win. We'll hand out our game balls, but we're going to predict game balls before the show. So I'm going to give you 2 shots at this, Ryan. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 cracks at this, and I think you'll like this. Number 1 is if the game plays out how you said in your predictions, 31-20, who gets your game ball on offense and defense? If the game plays out how you think it can play out and Notre Dame dominates, does that change your game balls? So I'm going to give you that chance to kind of answer that. So first of all, if the game plays out the way that you predicted, who gets your game balls?
If it's the way I predicted, I think it's Audric Estime gets the game ball for me. Because I think that with a 31-20 victory, that tells me that is a competitive football game, and Notre Dame just kind of eases the tension down the stress, and maybe they distance themselves a little bit at the end there. And when I think about that type of football, I think of a closer, I think of a grinder. And that for me is Audric Estime. We've seen now in back-to-back games where Chris Tyree gets him loosened up early. Logan Diggs even got him loosened up a little bit early. And then the second half, it was Audric Estime riding down the stretch of the football game. So I think if it is what I predicted, I think it's Audric Estime, Brian, for that one. Now, if it's the other way, and it's the situation where if Notre Dame plays better than I even like that my mind is kind of telling me after watching a little bit more film, and Notre Dame kind of runs away with a little bit with this one, I think this is the Lorenzo Styles breakout game of the season, Brian. That's what I think. So Audric Estime for the grinding, smaller difference type of game. If they open it up a little bit and they have the type of game that I think they can have, if it is really rolling in the right direction, I think this is the game that Lorenzo Styles breaks out.
I agree with you, Ryan. I think if the game plays out the way that you did, I think one of the other backs will get it. I think it'll be Estime. I could maybe go with Tyree because I could see Tyree ripping off a couple runs. I think they do. Somebody mentioned it. They talked about Estime in the chat where when BYU does that thing where they kind of vacate the box, I could see Tyree really having some success because those guys closing on him, they may not be able to get to him the way that they can Audric and some other guys. And then with Audric, it's like I would not be one of those safeties trying to meet him in the hole. That would not go well. But I think that if the game goes how I predict it to go or how you think it could go, I think it's going to be Drew Pine that gets the game ball. Because I think Lorenzo could have a breakout, but I think what's going to happen is Lorenzo does well. He's going to hit some throws to Eli Raridan or, Braden Lindsey, and he's going to make some great decisions that are going to just rip BYU apart. And I think we're going to be handing the game ball to Drew because we're going to see so many different players make plays. But I'm not quite ready to go there yet. I think right now, I think the backs are going to be the deal in this game. I think one of the backs gets to play the game, or I may just say I may cheat at the end of the game and say, look, I'm getting it to the entire backfield, similar to what we saw against North Carolina, right? Because I think they're all going to have to make plays when they drop 8, getting those backs the ball in space and running back screens where you let them drop 8 and then you get your linemen down the field blocking those guys and you let those cats get behind them. I think we'll see some things like that as well. So
the offensive line was in my first prediction too, Brian. Yeah. That was the other thing I was thinking of. Maybe if it's 31-20 and they just kind of grind him out down the stretch, maybe the offensive line took over that football game. Sure. So
I hope that we're talking about maybe it being like Blake Fisher, You just look at it.
Or how about the entire offense? Just throw the entire offense to the game ball. That'd be nice.
They'd have to score a lot to do that. This would have to look like the New Mexico game back in 2000 from a score standpoint. It'd have to look like the New Mexico game from a couple years ago for me to feel good about that one. But yeah, we'll see. Defensively, Ryan, who gets your game ball?
Riley Mills. Riley Mills.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
Do you see any, like in your prediction, do you see the score for BYU kind of being the same no matter what? It's just about whether or not the offense, because that's kind of how I read what you said, that you feel like it's not the defense is going to do what they're going to do. It's will the offense do what it's capable of? Am I reading that a little bit to you correctly?
I think because Brian, I think what the defense has proven to me over the first 4 games is that like they can play on a good to very good level. Mm-hmm. Like even in their worst game against Marshall, they give up 19 points, right? Like it's just we haven't seen this team give up more than they ended up giving up 30 whatever against North Carolina, 32 against North Carolina or whatever. But like we know if we watched the football game, that was a couple broken plays at the end. Like for the most part, Notre Dame has played a good defensive game, from a game to game basis pretty much. So I think that I don't see BYU scoring a ton against Notre Dame. I think that again, Jared Hall is going to give him some issues at points. I think if Puka Nacua plays, he's going to make some plays. I think a couple of the wide receivers will make plays, but I feel pretty confidently that Notre Dame's defense is going to keep it at a reasonable level. Like I don't think that it's going to be a situation where they're going to be in a shootout. Like I don't see a shootout happening in this football game.
I think the only way that happens is if the offense makes some mistakes that allows BYU to score on some short fields. I think that's going to be the case in this particular game. So defensively for me, I really think this is going to be the breakout game for Cam Hart. I do. I think Cam's going to come out of this bye week. I think he's been humbled a little bit with how the game ended. I think Cam is a very prideful kid, and I mean that in a positive way, not in a negative way. I think he's going to watch the way the game unfolded against North Carolina and say, dude, I'm better than this. Like, I know I'm better than this. Yeah. I should be making these plays and all these type of things. And I think if you're BYU, Cam Hart's a guy that I want to go at more than Benjamin Morrison or Tariq Bracy, if I'm being honest. And if Clarence Lewis is in the game, I'm going after him. But BYU doesn't necessarily have the kind of players that can just run by Clarence the way that when Clarence have issues. But, we'll see how that goes. He's got to obviously play a little cleaner than he did last week. But if I'm BYU and I'm watching film, I'm going after Cam Hart. I'm going after and part of the reason it's twofold. One is I don't think Jack Kaiser has shown me that he's a great guy at getting that kind of depth to get under routes on curls and different things like that consistently and in cuts. So the field throws, to me, the in-breaking field throws are going to be there a little bit. I'm going to have some climb stuff over there a little bit that's going to work to the field. I know a lot of teams will do that to the boundary. I think that Notre Dame has been vulnerable in a lot. I was surprised. Like one thing I said is I was surprised that North Carolina didn't do more perimeter screens, because that is something that Notre Dame has struggled with at chunks of time this season, especially against Marshall. I think BYU will do more of that because that's who they are. And a lot of that's going to go after Cam just by design, number one. And then number two, I think they're going to go after Cam. And I think he's going to step up and answer with a big game. So I think Cam Hart's is going to be my pick, whether it's intercepting a pass, being great in coverage, coming up really well against the run. His run defense has been very inconsistent this season. I think Cam's going to come out of this break fired up, and he's going to make some big plays, and he's going to get my game ball on defense. And if it's not him, it'll be somebody up front. So
he needs it. He needs it.
No doubt. No doubt. Could you imagine if the other corners continue playing the way they have?
And then he plays
Right. So there we go. Somebody said any chance Notre Dame gets an INT finally. It's going to happen, right? Like that's. It's got to happen at some point in time. Will it be this game? I don't know. I have no idea. It's the weirdest thing.
If they get a couple turnovers in this game, then I feel even better about my prediction.
Yeah, especially if they're early. Yep. Oh, absolutely. Ryan, that's going to do it for our game prediction for Notre Dame. So we're going to get into some other big game predictions from this weekend. We'll also have a mailbag at the end. So before we go to the next section of this podcast, please check out. You're going to be able to listen to that if you're listening to this on podcast or via YouTube. You're going to find our previews of Bama. We're going to talk about Bama A&M on top of LSU, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, TCU. Ryan, what were some of the games talked about? We're going to talk Florida State and NC State. We're going to talk about a lot of the different games from this weekend that are going to be very, very entertaining games. I'm trying to find like where I wrote those down. But yeah, there's some big games we're going to discuss this weekend. You're going to find those on the CFB Nation podcast. So definitely subscribe to CFB Nation on YouTube. And also subscribe to CFB Nation on Apple, Spotify, all your podcast apps. You can find it there as well. So before we move on to there, it's never too early, Ryan, to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast. And of course, if you're listening via podcast, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. So Ryan, let's dive into our predictions for the big games this weekend. And I think one of the more, I don't know if I would predict for sure what the biggest game is. I think personally the biggest game is TCU and Kansas because there's more at stake there right now. But I think the most intriguing game intriguing matchup this weekend for me, because of what we're going to learn about both teams, is Tennessee LSU. And I think Tennessee has obviously got off to a good start this season. I wouldn't necessarily say Tennessee has gotten off to a great start this season, however. And I've seen some people say, well, LSU isn't that good and because they haven't beaten anybody. And I would say, yeah, I kind of agree with that, although I think the Mississippi State win was a really good win. I think that game, however, is more about that's a bad matchup for Mississippi State. This Mississippi State team, LSU is a bad matchup. They had an ugly win over Auburn. They didn't look great against New Mexico. And, of course, they got outplayed for 58 minutes against Florida State, right? Yeah. So, no, they haven't been great. But I don't think Tennessee's been world beaters necessarily either so far. I think they had a good win over Florida at Florida. That was at home against Florida. But they didn't pound on Florida like I thought they were capable of. Their defense wasn't as good that game as I thought they'd been. They beat Pitt, but not the way that I think they should have beat Pitt. So I don't think we've really seen Tennessee play great football yet. And so I think this is a game where we're going to learn a lot about one of these two teams. I think the winner of this team is going to show us a little something. I think for LSU, if they play like they did against Auburn or anywhere close, they're going to get blown out. But you can't assume that just because they played bad against Auburn, they're going to then go play bad against Tennessee. I don't know really what to expect from the LSU offense, Ryan. They are so wildly inconsistent. One week they look, wow, they're starting to figure it out. They're running the ball, and then the next week they can't move the ball at all. Tennessee, I think offensively we know who they are. I think for Tennessee, it's more about the defense, and that's the matchup that I find interesting, Ryan, is the LSU offense against the Tennessee defense. Two units that at times have looked good this year and at other times have not. I think how that matchup goes is going to be a big, big part of this football game. And this is number 8 versus number 25, by the way. Number 8, Tennessee, at number 25, LSU.
Yep. Well, and I think, Brian, anytime you play at LSU, it's a tough environment, right? Like it's going to be wild in there. I know LSU is going to be ready to play this football game because there have been doubters, and I know that they're going to be ready to prove some things against Tennessee. But I took Tennessee in this football game, man, and there's a couple reasons why. I took them 34-21 in this game. LSU, I think, has some interesting playmakers. Like I've talked about Keyshawn Boutte before on this podcast. I know Neighbors has made a few plays. Jaden Daniels has been a really nice running threat, but an inconsistent passer for LSU so far. I think that this is the game where Tennessee kind of wakes up a little bit defensively. They have a couple good defensive ends, Byron Young and Tyler Barron, that I think can make some plays. But more than anything, I think this is the difference in this football game is Hendon Hooker versus Jaden Daniels for me. Hendon Hooker has taken that massive step that we both thought he was going to take as potentially the best passer in the SEC, potentially, and one of the best passers in all of college football. Like he's up there, right? Like he's arguably one of the top 3 or 4 passers in college football so far this year. He's yet to throw an interception. I saw a crazy stat that's like, I think it's 48 touchdown passes to 2 interceptions over the last 2 years for Tennessee. So he's an excellent football player, and I think that he's going to make more plays than LSU is going to make. So I got a 34-21 victory for Tennessee. First legitimately good Tennessee team in quite a while, man. And I think that I think Hendon Hooker is the real deal. I really do.
I went 31-27. I kind of saw it, LSU kind of putting one on the board late.
Okay.
whether it be a field goal, touchdown. I think Tennessee wins the game, but I think it's going to be more of a battle right now because LSU's at home. You know, I like what I've seen from Tennessee, Ryan, but I think you nailed what's going to have to happen for Tennessee to win this game convincingly. It's going to be the offense. The defense is going to have to step up. I have no doubt that they're going to move the ball on LSU's defense. I think LSU has a quality defense. I do. I think they're a good defensive football team. I mean, the numbers certainly look good. They've held teams to 14.8 points per game. The most points they've given up in a game is 24. They only gave up 17 to Southern, 16 to Mississippi State, 17 to Auburn. They shut out New Mexico, but I don't think they've really been tested by a good offensive football team outside of Florida State. And Florida State should have scored more. I mean, they fumbled at the goal line, getting ready to go up 31 to 17. It would have been 31-17 at the time.
Yep.
You know, Florida State had several opportunities in that game to really blow LSU out and didn't take advantage. And we've seen that being an issue for Florida State really all season. They've missed opportunities to blow some teams out. Should have blown Louisville out, kept letting them back in the game. And of course, we saw them struggle to score against a Wake Forest defense that really shouldn't be stopping a team like Florida State.
No.
And then the rest of the teams they've played just don't have good offenses. This is going to be an offense unlike anything we've seen. I expect Cedric Tillman, I believe, is going to be back this week for Tennessee as well. So that'll be a big part of it.
Yep.
He didn't play against Florida, which, has to be considered part of the equation of how you evaluate that game, is the fact that he didn't get a chance to play against Florida. But Hendon Hooker has been absolutely brilliant. And the other part of this too, Ryan, that's really been a surprise for me is Tennessee has really run the football effectively this season. They weren't great against Pitt, but I think that's that's what Pitt's going to be. Pitt's so geared to stopping the run. And they're a really good defense, and they are we're going to not let you run the football on us defense. And that's why Pitt gave up 325 passing yards and 2 touchdowns to Hendon Hooker and lost the game. But in the other games against teams that aren't Pitt, he's completed 77, 78.6, and 80% of his throws. His lowest yardage total of the season, Hendon Hooker, is 325. He's averaged at least 10 yards per attempt in each of the last 2 games. He averaged 12.5 yards per attempt against Florida. And as you said, he's thrown 11 touchdowns and no picks this game. I do think he gets picked off this game. I do. I think he'll throw a pick this game. But I still think Hendon's going to have a great game. And I think the balance that Tennessee can throw at teams, they've run for at least 200 yards in all but the Pitt game. They ran for 227 against Florida. They ran for 238 against Akron. Should have run against Akron. 218 against Ball State. I think they're not going to rush for 200 plus. I don't see that, but I think they're going to run enough to keep it balanced and allow them to kind of quiet the crowd. And I think Hendon's going to make the plays he needs to win. In a game like this, right, it comes down to which quarterback do you trust more? And that's not even a discussion. It's not even a discussion. I think the only way that LSU can win is if their defense really just takes their game to another level. I think their defense has been good, Ryan. I just don't think it's been great. And I think they've benefited from playing some really not very good offenses. And here's the other thing. Auburn moved the ball on Tennessee. I mean, on LSU last week. Yep. They just couldn't put the ball in the end zone. I mean, they had 438 yards and 6.3 yards per attempt and only had 17. I mean, those numbers are a 28 to 35 point production numbers.
Robbie Ashford had a decent game for Auburn in that one, man. Decent game.
Did.
Yeah.
And so, when I look at that, I say, boy, that, I did not like what I saw from them. And now Robbie Ashford ripped you up a little bit with some big plays. And now you're going to have to defend Hendon Hooker. So I think that's going to be the balance is going to allow them to kind of take some of the pressure off Hendon. He's going to hit some big plays. And when the game's on the line, he's going to make the plays. If LSU can disrupt him consistently, which they're capable of, Ryan, then I think that they're going to be able to – that's how they're going to be able to win this game, because that'll force them to mistakes. It'll force them to turnovers. They can shut down the run and disrupt Hendon. That's going to be LSU's key to victory in this game.
Brian, every time I watch Hendon Hooker play, obviously I'm very entertained, but then I'm reminded of how just bad of a coach Justin Fuente was, and how the last time I saw Quincy Patterson, he was a backup quarterback at North Dakota State. And Brian, if you want to see something really funny, you should go look at Braxton Burmeister's stats at San Diego State. They are averaging 66 yards a game passing, man.
Yeah, I watched the Arizona game. It's bad.
And he started over Hendon Hooker at Virginia Tech.
The crazy thing is we saw Hendon do this at Virginia Tech.
He was good at Virginia Tech when he played. Yeah.
Whenever he got a chance, he did well. No, you're absolutely right. Their offense is averaging 19 points a game. They scored 13 points against BYU, 7 against Utah, 20 against Arizona, 17 against Toledo. The only really good performance they have offensively was 38 points against Idaho State.
I think I'm pretty sure the last time I looked, I'm pretty sure Braxton Burmeister has like 300 something yards passing on the season. And
you are incorrect.
I'm wrong. 400? Is it 400?
He only has 263.
Oh man, I gave more credit than I should have.
They're averaging 65.6 passing yards per game.
What you're saying is
they against Boise State, they went 2 of 16. This is like embarrassing. Like I don't know, like this would be bad for an option team. Burmeister went 2 for 8 for 33 yards against Boise State. Their backups went 0 for 8.
Ugh.
That's bad for an option team. Like I don't get it.
So what you're saying is that Hendon Hooker's worst game of the season, he threw for more yards than Braxton Burmeister has thrown all season for San Diego State.
By 60. By 60. Yes. Yeah, it really is kind of embarrassing for him.
Staggering, man. Yeah, it's staggering.
It really is. It really is. I mean, that kid's a good football player, and I'll never understood why he didn't get more love from Justin Fuente. But as you said, that's who he is, right? That's who Justin Fuente is. 2019, Hendon Hooker had 13 touchdown passes and 2 interceptions and 9.6 yards per attempt on a okay Virginia Tech team, pretty decent Virginia Tech team. And
that was the crazy part about him, man, is that no matter when Hendon played, he never turned the ball over either. Yeah. So I just never understood that.
Yeah. He had one bad game. He threw 3 picks against Wake Forest in 2020. But that was it. But Fuente, don't even get me started on that guy. So we both see Tennessee winning this game, but I think LSU's capable of winning this game. I don't think this is a gimme for Tennessee. They're going to have to earn it, and their defense is going to have to play a lot better if they're going to come away with this victory.
Yep.
So, Ryan, the other game, there's a couple games this weekend of ranked versus ranked opponents. And again, this is not what we would have predicted. I think there's 3 games all weekend. I'm looking through the schedule now. I believe there's only 3 games this weekend of 2 ranked opponents. And I am correct. Yes, 3 games. We already talked about one, LSU and Tennessee. We'll talk about another here in a minute, Utah, UCLA. The other one is number 17, Texas Christian University, the Horned Frogs, who are 4-0 against the undefeated 5-0, 19th ranked Kansas Jayhawks. That game is going to be at noon on FS1. TCU is a 6.5-point favorite. This is a big game, Ryan, and just forget all the cool story aspects of it. Right now, Oklahoma State, to me, seems to be the best team in the Big 12, but TCU and Kansas are right there nipping on their heels. The winner of this game stays undefeated in the conference and has a great shot to continue rolling. The loser takes a step back. Obviously, not only would you have a loss, but then you lose the head-to-head. And the Big 12 is still there's no divisions in the Big 12. It's just the 10 teams in the league, and the 2 teams with the 2 best records get in. Huge game, Ryan. How do you see this game playing out? What are the matchups that intrigue you most? What is your prediction in this game?
This is a really intriguing football game, Brian, because I have to think that most people probably think that TCU and Kansas at some point are going to come down to earth a little bit, right? Like right now they're riding high. It's awesome to see them ranked in the top 20 teams in the country, but I also don't really buy that they are one of the 20 best teams in the country. Like I feel like they're going to come back down to reality a little bit here soon, but it's a great story, obviously. And I'm really happy to see what Sonny Dykes has done. I'm happy to see what Lance Leopold has done in Kansas. Like they've done tremendous jobs. The matchups that I'm curious about is, and it's not a direct 1-versus-1 matchup, but I want to see these quarterbacks, man. They're playing great football. Max Duggan for TCU has looked better than he ever has in TCU by a long shot. Jalen Daniels looks like a legit dual threat player for Kansas at the quarterback position. So I'm excited to see a little bit of fun offense, man. But I think that ultimately, I do think that these teams are a little bit of smoke and mirrors. I ended up picking TCU 27-24. The more I look at this game, I actually think that TCU might win this one a little bit more convincingly than I originally kind of predicted, right? Like I think that this game could be like a 34-23 victory, 21 victory in favor of TCU, just because I think that they have more, especially defensively. Like I've liked a lot more of what I see from TCU on the defensive side of the football than I have from Kansas. So I think TCU wins this football game. I gave them a slim margin for victory, but I think that TCU is definitely going to win this football game. Just the question is if I underestimated what their offense is going to do against Kansas, because I really don't think Kansas has a great defense. I think it's been the offense that has been kind of taking them to where they are right now.
That's where I'm at in this prediction. I think that a lot of you all had low-scoring game predictions. You went 27-24. Sean Davis predicted Kansas to win 24-20. Vince predicted 21-17 in favor of TCU. A couple others, Sean Stiers predicted Kansas to win 45-41. Andrew McDonough predicted Kansas win 41-40. I think it's going to be a higher scoring game. Not quite that high. I think it's going to be – I went 38-33 TCU. I think Kansas scores last and then kind of goes for 2 and doesn't get it is how I see it. I still think you're sleeping on both of these football teams a little bit, Ryan. But I think that the team that I'm more of a believer in is TCU. Yeah. And it's what we talked about last week. You know, one of the things that we discussed when we talked about the Oklahoma-TCU matchup, we both thought Oklahoma was going to win that game. But the thing that I said was, I think this is a good TCU defense. What we didn't know, however, was they hadn't been tested by anybody. They played a pretty good Oklahoma. Oklahoma stinks, right? I mean, they're bad, but they're bad because of their defense.
Yep.
Like, they still score. And they handled that Oklahoma offense really effectively, and they've been really good on defense all year. What they've done is they've kind of still maintained the quality defensive philosophy that Gary Patterson installed, but then they've now brought a more modern offense to the table. Max Duggan has been a really good football player. I think the reason I'm more a believer in TCU is because I think the weapon, like Kansas, Jelon Daniels is excellent football player.
Yep.
But he is the Kansas offense, and everybody else kind of counters off of him. Max Duggan's doing a great job for TCU, but he's got weapons. I mean, he's got legit talent at running back. He's got legit talent at wide receiver. And still, their most dynamic playmaker, Quentin Johnson, has still yet to really break out this season. And so I'm a believer in TCU. I do think West Virginia or Kansas is a legitimate top 25 team. And the reason I say that, Ryan, is they're not like LSU's just beat up on a lot of bad teams since the Auburn game, right? Mm-hmm. You look at Kansas, they went on the road and beat West Virginia in overtime. They went on the road and smacked Houston, who's not as good as people thought preseason, which we didn't think they were going to be as good as the preseason ranking. I like the quarterback, but not a lot else. And then they beat Duke, and it was an 8-point game. Duke's a good football team. You know, I mean, are they a top 25 team? I don't have them quite there yet, but that's a good win. And they controlled that game. And then they showed that they can grind it out as well and beat an Iowa State team that's okay. So to me, they're a legitimate top 25 team, but I don't think they're going to be able to stop them because the big Achilles heel for them all season, to me, is going to continue to be their defense. They just don't have the athletes on defense. They did a really nice job against Iowa State, but against West Virginia, Houston, and Duke, they gave up 6.6, 6.4, and 6.5 yards per play. Yep. Whereas if you look at the TCU defense this season, they have yet to allow an opponent to go over 5.5, and that was SMU. And who threw the ball well on them. But Oklahoma was a 4.4. Tarleton State was at 5.5, and then they held Colorado to 4.97. So
Oklahoma was at 4.4?
Yeah. 4.38. Because they a lot of inefficiency in the pass game. So the point is TCU's defense lights out? Is this a vintage TCU defense? No, it's not a Gary Patterson, with the linebackers and edge players used to put out back when Stanford and TCU was at the Rose Bowl they played each other against, which was a great game back in the day. I think, I don't know, maybe it wasn't the Rose Bowl. But you remember that bowl game that TCU and Stanford had? It was like 17-16, great bowl game. TCU had a great defense. They're not there, but they're good enough. They complement what is an explosive offense really well because I think this TCU offense is really good.
Was that a Tank Carter-led TCU defense back then?
Yes, it was. Yeah. Yes, it was.
See, that was my look back in the day, man. I had the butterfly collar, and that was it right there.
Yes, 2017, I believe. I actually might be conflating two different teams, but I'm thinking the Michigan. I said the Stanford game, but I'm thinking of the Michigan State game is the one I'm thinking of. That was 2012. That's the game that I'm referring to. That was the Tank Carter-led team. I believe. Hold on a second. Did he not? Was he not? Let me find this. Yeah, he was actually gone by then.
2012?
2011. His last year was 2011. 2012, they played Michigan State, and that was a defense that had Kenny Kane, Joe Hasley, Jason Verrett, Sam Carter, Chris Hackett, Devontae Fields. So yeah, that was a good football team. And then they had Boykin at quarterback. So That was a 17-16 game, really good defensive football team. That's kind of who TCU used to be. I don't think that they are that anymore, but their offense is really good. I really like their offense. What I like, Ryan, is Kansas is fun to watch because they're a great story and they got a great quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
But what gives TCU a little bit more staying power is you can't really take one guy out of the game and keep winning. Kendry Miller's a good player. DeMercado is a good football player that can rip off big runs. Dugan is a legitimate runner. Like I said, in the pass game, I'm expecting Quentin Johnson to be a big-time player for them. He's got 12 catches for 114 yards so far. He's second on the team in receptions, but he's fifth in receiving yards. He's yet to get to the end zone. And this is a kid that last year had 33 catches for 634 yards and 6 touchdowns in only 9 games. Right, but you've got Tay Barber stepped up, Darius Davis, Gunnar Henderson, who had a big game against Oklahoma. They've had a lot of different guys stepping up. You can't just stop one guy. And against Oklahoma, they showed that. They had like 5 different guys rip off big plays in that game. Yep. Running game, passing game, all of it. And I think that balance is what makes them legit. And that's why I think they're going to win this football game. If TCU can force some turnovers, if Kansas can force turnovers, that gives them a chance to stay in the game. Because if you can give Jelon Daniels some short fields, then they've got a shot in this game. I just don't think they have enough firepower, Ryan, coupled with the fact that their defense has not shown me to be as good as the TCU defense this season. That's how I see it playing out.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So next, Ryan, let's talk about the other big game in the Big 12 this week. And it's not a big game from a national standpoint, but I actually do think this is a big game. And it's big for different reasons. For Texas is still in the Big 12 hunt. Texas is 3-2 right now. Mm-hmm. One of their losses was an out-of-conference loss to Alabama. They bounced back from that, beat Texas San Antonio, and then dropped a game to Texas Tech. Now, that was a bad loss, Ryan. Donovan Smith absolutely ripped them up. But they bounced back last weekend and had a really convincing victory over West Virginia. So Texas sitting here at 3-2. You are the Red River Shootout, which some people call the Red River Rivalry. It's always going to be the Red River Shootout to me. It's a big game. They've had this has been almost annually for the last decade one of the more entertaining games of the season, unless you're someone who loves defense, right? So, but this is going to be, I think, another game where there's a lot at stake for Texas. Normally it's Oklahoma with a lot at stake in this game, and Texas is just hanging on to salvage their season. Roles are reversed a little bit this year. Texas comes into this 3-2, but only have one loss in conference. You beat Oklahoma in this particular game. You've got Iowa State at home next week before you have back-to-back huge games for Texas. Their stretch after Oklahoma and Iowa State is at Oklahoma State, at Kansas State, home against TCU, at Kansas, home against Baylor. If they're 4-2 going into that stretch and then 5-2, they beat Iowa State, they've got a shot to really have a quality season. You lose this game, you go into that stretch 4-3, and the wheels could come off a little bit for Texas. Oklahoma, on the other hand, is in position to already have their season, the wheels come off of their season.
Yep.
They have had back-to-back just bad losses. Just got outplayed in both games. The State game was closer in score because of, their offense was able to make some plays and they put some points on the board late. That was a home loss, Kansas State. The TCU game was never close. Didn't they have like almost 30 at the end of the first quarter?
They had 27 at the end of the first quarter.
It was a blowout from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And what does Oklahoma do, Ryan? They're in position now in this game where they're trying to salvage their season. It doesn't get easier for them. Next week, they host Kansas. Then they play at Iowa State, home against Baylor, at West Virginia, home against Texas Tech, and or home against Oklahoma State and at Texas Tech. So they've already played 2 of the better teams in the league, but they go to 3-3. You can kiss the Big 12 championship goodbye. But now you're saying, okay, it's not a given that they're going to have a 500 season if they get beat by Texas. So, if you think Notre Dame's got some question marks about their new head coach because they lost to Marshall, imagine what's going through the locker room in Oklahoma right now. Yep. Because they're not only losing, Ryan, they're getting destroyed.
Yes, they are. Brian,
how do you see it playing out?
This is another one where, honestly, I wanted to predict this one to be even more lopsided in Texas' favor, if I'm being completely honest. Like, originally I wrote down 37-17, because I truly think that this is going to be, look, whether you are a Dylan Gabriel fan or not, I like Dylan Gabriel as a college quarterback. The fact of the matter is that whoever is playing quarterback for Oklahoma with him out now is not nearly as good as Dylan Gabriel is. And I think we saw that. Even though Dylan Gabriel wasn't having a great football game, when the backup came in, you were just like, oh man, this is not great. Like, this is some trouble happening right now, right? So with Dylan Gabriel out, I think the offense is going to take a step back. And I think that defense just showed exactly how not good they are in Oklahoma right now, right?
They've
and then
regressed.
you have Quinn Ewers coming back for Texas, which I think is big for them. They've, I think Hudson Card did an okay job for what he is, but I think with Quinn Ewers back, that unlocks a lot more of what this offense could do for Texas. So I have Texas 37-27, and I bumped it up to 37-27 just because it's a rivalry game, right?
Yeah.
Like these teams get up for one another, right? Like
because we've seen
tough.
years where Oklahoma's really good and Texas is bad, and Texas
it's still a
upsets
competitive
them,
football game.
or it's a close game. Exactly right. Exactly
100%.
right.
Yeah. So I, in actuality, I think that this is kind of a lopsided victory for Texas against Oklahoma, but I think the score will be a little closer because of the rivalry aspect to the game.
Yeah. I think there's also a desperation aspect to Oklahoma. And
Sure.
honestly, I think the reason that I don't think Oklahoma has a chance to really be overly competitive, I went 41-27, is I just think I'm not as high on Dylan Gabriel as you are, at least not at the Power 5 level. And an offense that asks your quarterback to do as much as Oklahoma is asking him to do. Having said that, he's still a solid quarterback. But just the hit he took last week is going to do one of two things. Number one, he's not going to play in this game, and I don't expect him to play. And with that being said, that to me, I mean, Davis Bevel is not going to do to Texas what Donovan Smith did to Texas.
You want to win, put General Booty in. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, I guess we'll see, right? But he has not played yet.
No.
And but I just don't think they have the firepower. They're not as good up front as they've been in the past. They run the ball okay, right? Their numbers are good, but they're not able to get the tough yards when they need it. They had good running yards against Kansas State, but they had some chunk yards late in the game when Kansas State was kind of giving them some stuff, some scrambles and such. They went for 3-7 rushing against TCU. They went for 3-7 against Kent State. They ran the ball well on UTEP, who's not very good, and they ran the ball well on Nebraska, who's not very good. So they've just been a really inconsistent team, honestly. Yep. And I just don't see them. Look, and the thing about it is the other thing about Oklahoma is Oklahoma's defense has been bad in every capacity, but their rush defense has been especially bad to me. They gave up 288 yards to UTEP, who, as I mentioned earlier, actually that's passing yards. They gave up 275 yards to Kansas State rushing and 361 to TCU. Texas has not been a good rushing team so far this year. That's going to be a key for me. Texas, whether Hudson Card's playing quarterback or Quinn Ewers is back and he's able to play quarterback. And I don't think they've officially stated that he's going to start this week, although there have been reports by Pete Thamel of ESPN and some others that he's going to play. I don't know if you were going to say, hey, Quinn, you've been out a month. Let's go out there and throw it 50 times, right? I think you want to try to get Bijan Robinson established in the run game. They've done a pretty good job of getting him the ball in different ways as the run game has struggled at times. But I think they really need to try to get the run game going in this game, take pressure off your quarterback, and then open up some big play opportunities. If they get Bijan going in the run game, that opens up Xavier Worthy more in the pass game. He finally had a breakout game last week against I'm drawing a blank here, West Virginia, right? 7 catches, 119 yards. I think he builds on that. He rips off some big plays because this was kind of, to me, his national coming out party last year. Now, he was playing well before the Oklahoma game last year. Xavier Worthy was. But the Oklahoma game was kind of his, like, everybody saw it. He went 9 catches for 261 yards. He had 5 catches for 100 yards against Texas Tech before that, 6 for 71 against Rice. But this was his breakout party. And I think he's going to – I think as bad as they've been in coverage, and they haven't faced anyone like Xavier Worthy so far.
Yeah.
So I think he's going to go off in this game. And I think they're going to establish the run. I have him 41-27, Ryan, but I'm with you. I could see it being a lot more lopsided than this. My 41-27 was rivalry game, my rivalry game score. Yeah, I could see this one getting ugly.
Brian, and the thing about the TCU game is I know we don't want to just hyper-focus on one football game, but the fact of the matter is that TCU scored 55 points, and it could have been way worse. I mean, they started just calling off the dogs in the
Yeah.
late third quarter. Like that game could have been 70-something to 20-something. Like
Yeah.
it was that bad, man. This Oklahoma team is in the worst place possible defensively right now. So yeah,
and they had some really bad calls that kept them from even more success.
Yep.
I mean, TCU had some bad calls go against them. I mean, it was a bad officiated game, period. I mean, that officiating crew should be suspended, but it really hurt them more so.
Yep.
To your point, Ryan, they had 41 points at halftime. They scored 14 points in the third quarter and then nothing in the fourth quarter. Completely called off the dogs.
Yep.
And it was a really, really, I mean, it's 55-17 at one point, Ryan. I mean, it could have been worse. Could have been worse.
The worst part about it was, I was enjoying watching Oklahoma get killed a little bit, but then I had to listen to Robert Griffin commentate the game, which was a little bit of a mixed opinion there.
It's rough. It's rough. That's rough. There's no doubt about it. So I have you have Texas winning. I have Texas winning. I am curious to see if Quinn Ewers plays, if they can kind of get him rolling. I think that's going to be the key. Hudson Card did okay, kind of managing things as Ewers is out, but they need Ewers to be they don't need him to be the best quarterback prospect ever nonsense like we've seen from 24/7 Sports. That was never a thing. He was never as good as they made him out to be. He's not as bad as some people who don't like him make him out to be. He's got talent. He's just got I think he's in a situation now as a young kid. He hasn't played football in a couple of years until this year, because obviously he sat out last year, basically sitting at Ohio State so he could collect some NIL paychecks. It's been a minute since he's played. They need to allow him to gradually grow into that role, which they were starting to do before he got hurt. And kind of go back to that, just give him some stuff he can execute, let him get some shots down the field. But that's why I think the run game is so important. If Quinn plays and they can establish the run game and then let him hit some shots down the field to Xavier Worthy off the run action, I think that puts him in a good place, coming out of this game with some confidence. He'll have confidence against Iowa State, and then they need him to really step up and be good, because once they kind of hit the end of October into November, Texas, there aren't many teams that have a tougher final 5 games than Texas has. Again, I'll repeat, at Oklahoma State, at Kansas State, home against TCU, at Kansas, home against Baylor. I would not have thought that stretch was going to be very tough at the beginning of the season. I didn't. Because I remember at the beginning of the season, we're like, hey, if they can get out of this Oklahoma game undefeated, with only one loss, they got a chance to be really good because the end of their schedule is not that hard. Now you look at it and you're like, boy, it's going to be a brutal stretch of games. So I think they're going to get the win, Ryan. The question I have is, what happens to Oklahoma if they lose this football game? Because they got Kansas next week.
Man,
I mean, is Kansas? Are they going to get right against Kansas? I mean, then they got Iowa State, a bye week, and then at Iowa State they still got to play Baylor. They got to play at West Virginia. They got to play home against Oklahoma State. They got to play at Texas Tech. There's a lot of losable games on there. A lot of winnable games if they can get right, but there's a lot of losable games on that schedule for Oklahoma.
It's a big stretch for Brent Venables too, because I wasn't the biggest Venables as a head coach type of guy. Like defensive coordinator for sure, man. Like absolutely. But as a head coach, I just had a lot of mixed feelings about it. Right now, I mean, his team it's ready, Brian. We're like another bad performance and it's in the gutter, man. Like you're just like, you could lose the team right now. Yep. So I'm interested to see just how he kind of calms those reservations and that kind of that shock factor right now. I mean, Oklahoma needs to have a good performance in this game, not even win. They just need to be competitive in this football game, because I mean, you could sell this as, and it's not entirely untrue, right? Like there was a lot of max exodus this past offseason with transfers and with Lincoln Riley leaving, and there was turnover on this roster that you had to kind of get in the right direction. So I never expected this team to be like a top 10 team.
Which was nonsense when they were a preseason top 10 team, right? It was utter nonsense. Because as you said, Brent Venables legitimately went through a massive turnover on his staff and on his roster.
Yep.
I mean, they lost a lot of kids, not just kids who went to USC, but they lost guys who went to other places as well.
And they lost, even though the defense wasn't great last year, they lost a lot of guys to the NFL too. From
3 or 4 guys got drafted last year, right? Including 2 guys from the front 7. So yes, you're correct. It is. They went through a lot, and now they're not doing a lot with what they have. But I just honestly, I didn't think Lincoln Riley recruited great his last year too. To be honest with you, he got some studs, but overall, I didn't like their classes. And so then the studs left, and you're left with what was left in those classes. So it'll be an interesting matchup and a big opportunity for Texas to take some momentum in this series, because Texas is recruiting at a very high level right now. Yep. Oklahoma is recruiting well. But if Oklahoma gets blitzed in this game after what happened the last 2 weeks, you could see their top 10-ish recruiting class start to get picked apart. And one team that will try to do that, Texas. There's no doubt about it. And Texas right now is got a really good class they're putting together. This is the kind of win that can solidify things for Sark to say, hey, look, we're not there yet, but this is why we need you guys, because this is what we're capable of. And then you can really sell that win.
We own the Red River. Yeah,
that's right. That's
exactly.
Right. Ryan, the next game that I want to discuss is a Pac-12 matchup that is going to be played at 3:30 on Fox. It is number 11 Utah at number 18 UCLA. Utah is a 3.5-point favorite. This is a very intriguing matchup because one of the things that I felt is that if Utah loses to Florida, they have no chance to be a college football playoff team. Well, what we have seen, because the Pac-12 stinks, what we have seen, and I'm not quite sure why, but the perception of the Pac-12 is starting to change. Again, I don't quite know why. I think the Pac-12 has had some good wins, but they haven't had good wins over very good teams. I mean, the win over Michigan State was an impressive win for Washington, but Michigan State's not that good.
No.
But the reality is the perception is that Utah, the Pac-12 is better. And so now Utah, looking at their schedule, thinking that they're just going to have a bunch of games against teams that nobody cares about. Now, all of a sudden, you're looking at your schedule, and you've got to play number 18 UCLA. You've got to play number 6 USC at home next week. You still have a game at number 12 Oregon, and then potentially, you get a postseason game against Washington, who's a top 20 team, if Washington can kind of go on a roll. So now, all of a sudden, that schedule that was looking like it was going to be not good enough for them to rise back up the rankings does, and it starts this weekend against number 18 UCLA, who, for half a game against Bowling Green in the opener, was losing. And since then, they have started to roll, right? They beat South Alabama 32-31, and you're thinking, man, you struggle with Bowling Green, you lose to South Alabama. Man, what's going on with y'all? Well, South Alabama right now is 4-1 and just came off of a road win over Louisiana Lafayette. So now that looks like an ugly win because it's still South Alabama. But you know what? That South Alabama team, maybe they're not that bad. And then you come out and then they pound Colorado, who stinks. But last week against Washington, they won 40-32. That was not that close of a game. I think it was like 40-16 at one point, Ryan. They dominated Washington last week. Sure. That is a salty UCLA defense when they want to be. You've got Utah, who is getting back to playing better defense. They had a very impressive win last week against Oregon State. Now, they have not been tested since the win over Florida. Southern Utah, no. San Diego State stinks. Arizona State is a train wreck. Last week was the first test they had against Oregon State, and they thumped them. This is a big litmus test for Utah. Going on the road against 5-0 Utah, can Utah or UCLA, can Utah get the win, or does UCLA kind of announce, hey, Chip Kelly has got this thing rolling now with a win over Utah? How's it going to play out, Ryan, in your opinion?
UCLA is a really fun team, Brian. I mean, they have on defense Gabriel and the Murphy twins that are North Texas transfers that are playing pretty good football for them. And then on the offensive side of the football, they got Jake Bobo, who transferred from Duke, who's been playing really good football. They have Zach Charbonnet, who's a good running back in the college, like a really good running back on the college level. So there's a lot to like about this UCLA team. Utah, I was higher on Utah than you were in the preseason. And they had the loss early on against Florida, so they kind of took a step back. But I think we have seen over the last few games that Utah's defense has been playing really well, and they're really starting to figure it out. Clark Phillips, man, might be the best corner in college football right now. He's playing phenomenal.
Ryan, we may disagree about Utah. We don't disagree about Clark Phillips. We never disagree about Clark Phillips. Yes.
He's a stud, man. And I think that some younger players on that defense, like Cole Bishops of the world, are starting to play good football for Utah, and Clark Phillips is an absolute stud. So ultimately, I also like on the Utah side of the football, offensive side of the football, I think Cam Rising is just a really solid college quarterback, man. Like, doesn't make a ton of mistakes, keeps you on schedule. And I think that's all they need to do against UCLA, because the one thing about UCLA is, although I think they're a talented football team, they have a lot to like, I think that they are a little volatile, right? Like one week you'll be like, they could compete with anybody in the pack, and they could beat anybody in the pack. And then next week they kind of look a little shaky, right? So that's what I think we're going to get this week. After having a really dominant win over Washington last week, I think they're just going to have a little, I don't call it a hiccup because Utah's a good team, but I think Utah comes in and they win this football game because, again, I just think Utah is the more veteran-laden team. I think they've had more success historically over the last few years than UCLA. And I think they're more used to winning big football games more than UCLA is. So I think Utah comes into this game and they win. But I think UCLA will hang around because I do think that they have some offensive firepower to work with.
I'm still not sold on Utah. And the reason why is to your point, Ryan, UCLA has been a little bit more volatile, but I think UCLA has also shown that they can beat a good team, like a really good team. And I like the win over Oregon State. I'm very high on the job that Jonathan Smith is doing. And I like that Utah, it was close early and they just second half just really rolled Oregon State. That was a good win. Here's my thing though. I don't love Utah's rush defense. I don't. And statistically, it looks good. I mean, it looks okay, I should say. They've given up 123 yards per game this year and 4.1 yards per carry, right? That's because they held Southern Utah to 43. They held Arizona State to 6 rushing yards, and they held San Diego State to 113. They gave up 283 to Florida, and they gave up 171 last week to Oregon State. UCLA has one. This is just not a typical and it started last year. It's not a typical UCLA football team in that Chip Kelly has really built a physical football team. They don't look like his Oregon teams. They don't look like that fast outside zone, read zones team. They are a physical, punch you in the face football team. And I think that's helped their defense. I agree with you wholeheartedly about the volatility of UCLA. I mean, a team that just destroyed Washington last week, and Washington was rolling coming to that game, is also a team that was, again, losing for almost a half a game against Bowling Green and needed to – didn't South Alabama go for like a fake late in that game with a chance to win it? I mean, they had a chance to beat UCLA at the end of that game. But they've really righted the ship the last 2 weeks, and I think their rush offense has been really good this year. And I think that that's going to continue. And, you mentioned about Cam Rising. Everything you said about Cam Rising, I can't believe I'm going to say this, is exactly what Dorian Thompson-Robinson has been this year. And he has been a solid game manager. He's limited the big, bad mistakes that killed him in the past. I mean, he's got a big live arm, and he would make these throws like, man, that kid's got a great arm.
Great athlete,
and then he would just make but then he would make like these throws. You're like, dude, you threw it there was literally none of your guys were in the area. You literally hit a linebacker in the chest. You had no one over there. Like, I don't know what you're doing. He has not done that this year. He's really eliminated a lot of those mistakes that he had. He kind of started to do it a little bit last year, but then he would just have these misses where you're like, you have a guy wide open and he just like misses the guy by 5 yards. And you're like, what the heck? Yep. He's eliminated a lot of that stuff last week. And he made some money throws against Washington last week.
Oh, he looked great against Washington.
Oh, he did. But all year he didn't do a lot against Alabama State. He only went, 9 of 11 for 101 yards. He just didn't play. They beat him 45-7. He was pretty decent against South Alabama. 20 of 30 for 263. He went 19 of 23 against Colorado. They stink. He went 24 of 33 for 315 yards and completely outplayed Michael Penix in that game. And the other part, too, is I think their defense is playing really good football right now. That's the big thing for me. And, Jake Bobo, grad transfer from Duke, I'm sure Notre Dame could have probably got him into school. He could have helped. It's crazy what like a big, tall, long guy that maybe isn't like a burner, but you can just throw it up to and let him go play can do for an offense. Just hypothetically speaking, how important that is for an offense. But man, he looked great against Washington last week.
I think if you're any taller than 6'1", you can't play.
Clearly,
you can't play.
Clearly, it certainly doesn't fit the Notre Dame offense. That's for sure. But he's got a weapon. They've got some smaller guys can make some plays. I just really like this UCLA football team, and I wasn't sold on them. Going into last week. And we talked about that matchup last week, Ryan, because, I don't know what to make of them yet because they haven't really played anybody. Well, they played somebody last week and they look good. And I like how this team plays. So I'm going to UCLA in this game. And if Utah wins this game, then I'll be a believer in Utah because I think this is a good UCLA football team. And so if Utah can go on the road into the Rose Bowl and beat UCLA, then I'll say, okay, this is a legit team. They just had a bad day. It's like what we said about Notre Dame, right? What was the Marshall game? Just had a bad day. Right? Utah just had a bad day against Florida and still had a shot to win at the end. Right? So if they can do that, then I'll be a believer. But if right now I'm going with UCLA because I think UCLA is everything that you think Utah is. And we'll just find out. You know what I mean? Like good heady quarterback that just manages the offense, very disruptive defense, good rushing team, just a quality football team. I think that's what UCLA is this year. So That's why I'm going with them.
You're a big Chip Kelly guy, so
not really. No, not even kind of. I just like what I see. I mean, you pop on the film and you're like, man, this team is physical. They can be, to your point about the volatility, they can be very disruptive on defense. They can also look kind of mediocre on defense. You don't really know what to expect, and we're still only 5 games in. They've only played, 2 Power 5 teams so far this year, one of them being Colorado, so 1.5 Power 5 teams so far this year. So and that might be
Colorado. I can't believe how bad Colorado is. Awful. I really can't believe it.
Awful.
Yeah.
So I like what this UCLA team is doing. So Ryan, there's I want to get to one more Pac-12 game and then we're going to dive into a couple others here real quick. You have called. So what we do at Irish Breakdown is we predict the Notre Dame game each week. We predict 3 to 4 big games in college football, which we've talked about those so far today. And then we do our upset pick. You have an upset pick that I found very fascinating this week. I can see it. I'm not predicting it, but I can see it. That is Washington State, who is on the road against USC. They are a 13-point underdog. That game is going to be Saturday night at 7:30 on Fox. Ryan Roberts, explain to me why that is your upset pick of the week.
I think it's going to come for USC soon, man. Like, we saw them struggle a little bit against Oregon State. I think they've played better defensively than I anticipated. I still don't think they're a great defensive team, but they've certainly played better early on than what I anticipated. But ultimately, I just think that I think they're ready for one of these games. They're going to let down against a team that has a little less talent. And I've been pretty impressed outside of a game for Washington State. Like, I think that they have done some pretty nice stuff. I think that their transfer quarterback, Cameron Ward, who transferred from Incarnate Word in Texas, who was a incredible quarterback at the FCS level, transferred over here. And over the last couple games, Brian, he was volatile early, but he's really kind of rounding into form the last couple of games. And Washington State, surprisingly, has a couple guys on the defense that I really like. Brennan Jackson, a defensive end, a good football player. Dalen Henley, who is a transfer linebacker from Nevada, might be one of the biggest risers in the linebacker class for the 2023 NFL draft. He's having a fantastic year. One of the best linebackers quietly in college football. So I think it's going to be a high-scoring game because I think Washington State's going to be able to score against USC. And I obviously think also that USC is going to put up points if they're rolling a little bit, right? So I think Caleb Williams and that crew are going to score some points. But I have Washington State eking out because I think their defense is just a little better than USC. 45-41, Washington State upsets USC.
Ryan, I look at this game, and USC's defense is playing better football right now. The last 2 weeks they played better football. They shut down Oregon State. Well, in some ways, Oregon State shut down themselves, but they made some plays late, held Oregon State to 14. Arizona State scored 25, but they only gave up 331 yards, 5.4 for play. And as you saw, one of Arizona State's touchdowns came late. I mean, it was not a game you ever felt like USC was in doubt. It was like 21-17 at one point, but it wasn't like it was one of those games where it wasn't that close. UCLA had kind of shot themselves in the foot a couple times. Their defense has improved. We're going to find out how improved their defense is this week, Ryan, to your point. And I think that this Washington State offense is starting to get going. The only concern I have, Ryan, is Washington State can get a little bit one-dimensional. Well, no, they get a lot one-dimensional. That's my concern. Is they're a lot. I mean, they've had 3 games this year where they've had under 100 yards rushing. Their highest total this year is 143 yards against Colorado State.
Their screen game is the extension of their run games. I'm just messing, though.
I mean, there's some truth to that. I mean, the way that you run the air raid offense. I don't know if a team that one-dimensional can beat USC. That's my only concern. But what I have seen is Caleb Williams has been really close to several turnovers in recent games. And I'm wondering, I'm with you. The thing that impresses me at Washington State is, like you said, they play pretty good defense outside of the Oregon game, really the Oregon second half.
Yes.
They've played really good defense this year. Now, they haven't been tested by anybody great, but they completely shut down Cal last week. I mean, they did almost as well against Cal as Notre Dame did statistically. They did better than Notre Dame did against Cal points-wise. They gave up 9 points where Notre Dame gave up 17 points. Notre Dame held Cal to, 296 yards of offense. Washington State held them to 311 yards of offense. Notre Dame held them to 4.4 yards per play. Washington State held them to 5.1. Now it's partly because they had more success throwing the football. Cal had 280 yards thrown against Washington State, whereas Notre Dame only gave up 184. Notre Dame gave up 112 rushing yards because of scrambles, and Washington State held Cal to 31 rushing yards last week. So to your point, this is a much improved defense. And you know what's funny? This is the second time in the last 6-7 years that I've watched Washington State say, you know what? They're surprisingly good defense. The last time they had Alex Grinch was that last year of Alex Grinch. They were pretty darn good defense that year.
Hercules Mateafa.
Yes,
remember?
yes.
Yeah.
And I look at this team and say, boy, these cats, they play hard. They're smart. They play well. They fly around to the football. This is a good defense. This is going to be a big test for them because this is really USC's the only other really good offense they've played this year. And they ended up not being able to stop Oregon for 4 quarters. They had a big lead and then blew it. That's going to make this interesting. Is Washington State a legit team or not? Now, one thing about them, Ryan, they are going to, I'm curious about what their confidence level is going to be in this game because they have not been competitive against USC in recent seasons. They really haven't. And I think that's something that I worry about with them is how are they going to feel? Because, I mean, the last 2 years, I mean, USC, who stunk last year, beat them 45-14. And then the year before that, the COVID year, they beat them 38-13. They didn't play in 2019. They lost by 3 at USC in 2017. Last time they beat USC was back in 2017. So that's a question I have. If they're going to pull off the upset, they got to start fast. They got to jump on USC early and give themselves confidence they can win this football game. I'm not confident they can do it, but I'll tell you what, I would love to see it. There's no doubt about it. One game we're going to break down, and then one game we're just going to mention is a very interesting game. Last game we're going to briefly, not even break down, but just actually, you know what? We're not going to break these games down. We're just going to kind of talk about the games and kind of what we think. And that is, the first one is Texas A&M at Alabama. It is a 8:00 game on CBS. Alabama is a 24-point favorite. That surprised me a little bit just because of one thing Texas A&M has been able to do this year is play good defense. And I have not been blown away by Alabama's offense. I haven't. By the way, we will have a mailbag here as we get out of these 2 games here. So we will have a mailbag with some of the super chats, some of the other questions that we have. A&M or Alabama statistically looks good on offense, but I really haven't been blown away by the play of their offense this year. I think Texas A&M, for all their struggles, has played pretty good defense until last week. The question I have is, does last week start to snowball? Or can they at least keep this game within 24 defensively? But the reality is I don't think A&M has any chance at all to score on Alabama, much more than 17 points. Alabama is not as good as they should be on defense, Ryan. I think we both agree with that because of their talent level. But they're still better on defense this year than they were last year, in my opinion. And they did a pretty good job keeping Arkansas in check. I mean, Arkansas didn't really start to make a comeback until Bryce Young went down. And Alabama took a while to kind of find their footing. And then Arkansas turned, what was a 28-7 game to make it 28-23, and then Bama rolled. And if Bryce Young doesn't play, I think this game is this is going to sound crazy. I think this game, if Bryce Young doesn't play, could be the best thing for Alabama for the rest of the year. Here's what I mean. Bryce Young's a star, but I think Bill O'Brien is a pass-happy offensive coordinator who doesn't utilize the ground game enough. What happened when they started to roll Arkansas last week? They said, screw it. We're just going to run the football. Right? And they went off. And Jalen Milroe made some big runs. This should be a better rushing team than they are. They're not, because Bill O'Brien doesn't commit to it. I think if they have to play Jalen Milroe this week, then what you're going to see is that Bill O'Brien's going to be, well, he may not be. He's going to be forced to run the football by that dude in the big boy chair, right? In that stadium. He's going to say, hey, we're going to run the ball. I think a lot of their yards are fluffy yards this year, or game over yards. I think they're going to have to come out this game and really pound A&M. And I think that's going to benefit them moving forward when Bryce comes back. Hey, keep that balance. Build off that, and then we can protect Bryce Young that way, because they don't have the receiving core to just rip teams up. The second half of what we saw from Alabama last week was the best I think their offense has looked all year, because they ran the football. If you can combine that rushing with the brilliance of Bryce Young, this team's going to have a chance to be very, very dangerous coming out of this game once Bryce Young gets back. So I actually think if Bryce doesn't play, that can end up being a very, very good thing for Alabama moving forward. I just don't know if they're going to be able to, beat A&M by 24. I think that they will, but I just have some doubts. I think they're going to destroy out Texas A&M. Honestly,
I do too, and it's more about what Texas A&M is right now than what Alabama is, because I mean, like you said, I mean, Alabama's always going to have some dudes, right? Like they have Will Anderson, they have Dallas Turner, they have DeMarco Hellams, they have Jordan Battle, they have Henry To'oTo'o, like they have guys, obviously, right? Like that's not breaking news to say that Alabama is again talented. And then Jahmyr Gibbs ran for 200 yards last week. To your point, even if it's Jalen Milroe, I think they're going to do enough offensively to score a good amount of points in this one. Haynes King is starting for Texas A&M. Max Johnson is now out of this football game. And whether it was Max Johnson or if it was Haynes King, I think that this is going to be a lopsided affair because to your point, Brian, I don't think that Texas A&M is a consistent offense right now. And I also think that they have struggled to create explosive plays. You have because Anaya Smith is out right now too, if I remember correctly. So, I mean, they are missing a home run element to their offense. They still have some guys like a Devin Achane, who's a good running back, and a Evan Stewart, who's a star freshman. There's some guys, but they haven't really created a incredible explosive plays this year, and they have not been a consistent offense. So give me Alabama to roll on this one.
Evan Stewart, is he a star redshirt freshman or a star true freshman? I didn't know you were allowed to throw the ball to freshman receivers.
He won his petition this before the season started.
And Notre Dame needs to hire his lawyer, and so they can start throwing the ball to freshman receivers. Sorry, I had to go there. I think that if you just look at the on-paper matchup, I think this game's going to be ugly. I do. I think Alabama's going to just physically beat them up. But I think when you throw in the fact A&M made two big mistakes, two huge mistakes. Number one, they beat Bama last year. Big mistake. When you look at this game. Number two, Jimbo running his mouth this summer. Yeah. Like, he went so far over the top that, number one, you knew he was guilty exactly of what he was accused of. That's why he got so indignant about it, right? Number one. And then number two, he kept going. And then, like if you called Nick Saban, I don't even call Nick Saban, talking a million miles an hour, saying that guy can say more words and mean nothing than anyone I've ever met in my entire life. But that, to me, Nick Saban is not going to call off the dogs in this game. And he's going to be, no. I think he's going to be very, a little salty this week. And I think Alabama's players like Nick Saban. I've never heard anything other than they respect Nick Saban. And I think they're going to see like this is a chance for us to go have our coaches back. And I think they're going to absolutely annihilate A&M this week. I really do. I don't think it's going to be like part of me when I just look at the matchup, I think A&M has a pretty good defense and all these other kind of things. But if Milroe plays, I wonder if they can get to 24. It could be it being a 34-13 game with A&M punching one in late. But if Alabama really comes to play, boy, I think it's going to get really ugly, Ryan. Really ugly. Because I just think of all the extra stuff. I just think this could get bad. And here's the question for A&M. If you lose this game, I mean, somebody asked earlier, who's the bigger doghouse? Is like Jimbo Fisher or who was the other person? I forget that they mentioned. I should have started. I don't think that I started down there. But, I mean, Jimbo's, he's got to be in trouble if they get, because look, the rest of their schedule, there's losable games on there. They play at South, they have a bye week, then they play at South Carolina. That's not a gimme the way that A&M's playing right now. They have Ole Miss at home. That's not going to be easy. They have Florida at home. That's not going to be easy. They play at Auburn. The way A&M's playing right now, that's not going to be a gimme. Then they play UMass. That will be a win. And then they play LSU. Well, there's games they can win on there, but there's a lot of games they can lose too. I wonder if they get destroyed in this game after getting curb stomped by Mississippi State last week. What's this team's psyche?
Yeah.
And how many of those 5-star kids that you bought with signed last year in the recruiting class, how many of those kids are staying? Or do they say, hey, you know what? It's a chance for me to jump in a portal and get another payday. Yep. I think A&M's in big trouble, Ryan. I think they're in big trouble because there was a ton of expectations this year. You signed the number one recruiting class. Jimbo runs his mouth at the big dog, and you're 3-2. And honestly, you should have lost to Arkansas. If Miami had any kind of creativity offensively, you lost. The only team that they've outplayed so far this year, Ryan, for 4 quarters is Sam Houston State. That's it.
Yeah,
that's it. So I don't like this team, and I think this could send them spiraling downward. It really could.
Have you ever seen the Nick Saban meme where it's like it's when he was talking to one reporter, he's like, "I'm not going to, so stop asking."
Yeah.
That's him this game. If they're up by a substantial amount, and they're like, "Hey Nick, you want to call off the dogs?" I'm not going to, so stop asking.
Yes, I agree. I think they are going to score until they like. I think he'll put his backups in, but I think he'll put his backups in and throw the ball. You know what I mean? Like I think he'll put them in and let maybe. Was it Ty Simpson or one of those other guys gets in the game and they're still going to throw. Like that's what I think he'll do. I think this game is going to be ugly. Absolutely ugly. And the Bryce Young thing is interesting. I wouldn't play him. I would have him ready. I wouldn't play him unless
in case I need him. Right.
I would do with him what Notre Dame did with Jimmy Clausen against Purdue in 2009. You remember that? Dane Chris started and Jimmy came off the bench late to rally him. I would only play him if I had to. I especially when you're talking about it was a throwing shoulder, I wouldn't play him. I really wouldn't play him. If you can't beat A&M without Bryce Young, you have big problems. And I think they can. I really do. And here's the other thing. Because of the shoulder, that gets real tricky, man. Like you don't know when that's going to go again. Then my thing is this is a chance for you to get Jalen Milroe some legitimate start, some legitimate snaps where he's not, hey, you've got a lead. Don't lose it like last week. If Bryce's shoulder goes again, this is a chance for you to really make sure that kid's ready to go and step into that spot if you need him to. So I personally would not play him on Saturday unless I had no choice. I really wouldn't. Thoughts on that, Ryan? What would you do if you were in Nick Saban's shoes?
Yeah, I would probably be tentative with it because again, like the larger aspect goals for Alabama is more important than one game against Texas A&M, right? And honestly, it just comes from a simple fact, Brian. Like whoever the quarterback is for Alabama, I still think they're going to win substantially. Like I don't think that this is Bryce Young is the difference between winning a football game and losing a football game against Texas A&M. I don't think that this is the game that you worry about that, if I'm being honest. But like you said, I would have him ready just in case the worst case happens. But long term, it matters a lot more what Bryce Young looks like than what he looks like on Saturday.
I agree. There's another game, Ryan, that I think is very interesting, and it's a game that matches two unranked teams, and it has an impact for Notre Dame a little bit. North Carolina plays at Miami. Now, North Carolina obviously comes into this game with a 4-1 record. There's actually a couple ACC games I want to just discuss as we wrap this up. North Carolina at Miami. Miami is a 3.5-point favorite. I was a little surprised by that. I really was. Especially with if this game happened after Notre Dame and we were talking about how they hadn't really beaten anybody and all that, but the way that they smacked Virginia Tech last week, I'm a little surprised that North Carolina was an underdog in this game. I am a little bit, but this is a must win for Miami too, man, because they're in a similar situation to Notre Dame and BYU. You're 2-2. You've lost two, except they flipped. You've lost 2 games in a row. You had a bye week last week. You're coming off of an embarrassing loss to Middle Tennessee. I mean, Notre Dame had a bad loss to Marshall, but at least Notre Dame, you say, boy, they were up in the fourth quarter. They had chances to put it away. They got dominated by Middle Tennessee. It really did. And you go now lose at home to North Carolina and fall to 2-3. You've got at Virginia Tech still left on your schedule, at Clemson still left on your schedule, at Georgia Tech, at Virginia left on your schedule, Duke at home, Florida State at home, and Pitt at home. I thought Miami was going to be really good this year, and they haven't been. I thought they would win the Coastal this year, and they have been not good. If they bounce back with this win, the reality is they're fine because, Ryan, they're 0-0 in conference. Their 2 losses were out of conference. They can still win the Coastal, but they got to get right now because this is Miami has always been a front-runner program, and they fall behind, then they collapse, right? But if they can get this is a big game for them, in my opinion. Same thing for Carolina. And this is a big game for Carolina, too, because if you bounce back from your Notre Dame loss and you now go to 5-1 with back-to-back wins over Tech and Miami, then I think Carolina gets rolling. So there's a lot at stake in this game, Ryan. And it's not a sexy game because it's 2 unranked opponents. But I think this is a really, really big game for both teams, especially Miami. But it's big for them for 2 completely different reasons, in my view.
The line on this game's so weird, though, Brian. I mean, you mentioned it, right? Like Miami favored by 3.5. It's like one of those lines where you're just like, what does someone in Vegas know that I don't know? You know, like that's what it feels like to me because mean, Jake Garcia is starting. I watched Jake Garcia throw, and I'm impressed by his just general talents.
I thought they were putting
is Van Dyke back in?
I thought so. Yeah, I could be wrong on that. I thought
you may be right. I thought that they were just sticking with Garcia for the time being, but I could be wrong about that.
Either way, anyway, continue with what you're
Either
doing.
way, whether it is Tyler Van Dyke or Jake Garcia, I would take North Carolina with those points all day, sir, because I think that because Miami's really struggled against the pass this year defensively, man. Like, they really have. So what makes me think that they're going to do well against the North Carolina passing attack? Like, that's my biggest thing, right? So at the end of the day, I'll take the quarterback in the passing game of North Carolina over what Miami has uncertainty at quarterback and their offense in general right now. So I think North Carolina is a just better team right now than Miami is, and Miami is a little fractured from a confidence level perspective.
Yeah. I don't think Miami's that good against the run either. Statistically, they look really good, but it's because they haven't really played anybody that's good at running the football, to be honest with you. I think this is going to be I think Carolina wins this one. I really do. I think they win this one convincingly. I really do. I could be wrong. There's a couple other really interesting games in the ACC. Clemson at Boston College. Does Boston College build off their success against Louisville last week, or does the O-line versus D-line matchup just really hurt them? Which I think that's the scary thing. That's why I don't think they can be competitive. But the other game in the ACC that not a lot of people are talking about that I think is really interesting is Florida State, who's now back out of the top 25 against, which I don't think they should be, by the way, at number 14 NC State. I look at this game right now, Ryan, and I don't like how Florida State played last week. But with all due respect, if you look at the course of the season, Florida State's been a more impressive looking football team this year than NC State has. And this is kind of one of the issues I have with rankings. Like I did an IB top 25 last week, and I did not have NC State in the top 25. And people are like, how can you not have them? You shouldn't drop out of the top, 25. You were number 10 last week. I said, I didn't have number 10 last week. Like, the only reason NC State's ranked 10th, Ryan, is because of what they were last year. I mean, you're hanging your hat on a win over Texas Tech at home. Your next best win was a 1-point win at East Carolina. What has NC State done to deserve that? Well, Florida State's got a much more impressive resume. You beat LSU on a neutral field. You won at Louisville, and you beat Boston College convincingly, but then you dropped that home game to Wake Forest, and it completely soured them. So can Florida State bounce back? Can they play well against one thing? I think NC State has been pretty decent on defense this year. And Florida State didn't play well last week against Wake Forest. So they bounce back, or is that the beginning of Florida State was never that good, and now they're being exposed? Because now that Louisville win doesn't look as good because Louisville's really struggled.
Sure.
The BC win looks better after they bounce back, so kind of balances. What is Florida State going to be? And is NC State going to be able to finally get its offense going? Because that's the biggest concern for me if I'm North Carolina State. Their offense has been mediocre this season, and they have not been able to get Devin Leary really going. And I think if I'm NC State, that's a big concern for me. Big concern.
I think that NC State's also suffering from a inability to be a little balanced on offensive side of the football, because I think that we underrated the fact that they lost Zonovan Knight and Ricky Person in the offseason, right? Those two good running backs that they lost in one offseason is tough to kind of turn around and to continue an ascension up. So I think this is a Florida State victory, Brian. I really do. I don't know exactly what the score will be, but I'm just very hesitant on NC State, man. I think after losing to Clemson they did last week, I think they might just kind of have a little bit of a slide coming forward here. I think that they'll recover and they'll play good football down the stretch. But I think that Florida State, if Jordan Travis is near 100%, I know he's getting back to close to there, and Jared Verse, their defensive end, is close to what he was early in the season from a health perspective, I think that they end up winning this football game. So I like what Florida State's actually been doing pretty well this season, and I'm just not sold on what NC State is right now.
Yep. So that's going to do it for our previews. We did have some questions about some other games that people want us to get to, Ryan, but we're going to do that in the mailbag, and that's going to come up right now. So, Ryan Roberts, it's mailbag time, man. Let's rock this thing out, okay? I'm going to start right now with what Brandon had, and then we'll get into some super chats. But Brandon says, B. Ryan, can I get a prediction for Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, and then Kansas State, Iowa State? And then there's a third game I want to ask you about too, Ryan, as part of the mailbag too. So Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, Ryan, what say you?
I think Oklahoma State continues their pretty decent start so far. I really, and again, I have been so up and down with Spencer Sanders during the course of his career because he's such a talented kid, but he's just been so volatile during the course of his career. But I mean, so far this season and dating back to the Notre Dame bowl game, man, like he's looked pretty good. He's been playing good football. So I think Spencer Sanders has kind of turned the corner as a fifth-year senior. I think he's playing good football. And I think they still have Colin Oliver and Brock Martin and a couple of nice pieces on the defensive side of the football. So I think Oklahoma State wins that one. Texas Tech has been kind of a pesky team most of the year, right? Like they've played really competitive football games. So I'm not saying it's going to be a blowout, but I will just take the Oklahoma State game and Oklahoma State team in this one narrowly over a tough Texas Tech team.
Ryan, the interesting thing for me is I would argue, obviously, statistically, last week's performance over Baylor was obviously Spencer Sanders' worst performance of the season, just statistically from a yard standpoint.
Yeah.
Only threw for 181 yards, 6.2 yards per attempt, went 20 of 29. But you know what? He actually impressed me in that game. And the reason why is because, to your point, he avoided like the really bad mistakes. He avoided the really bad misses. There wasn't a lot there for him down the field, so he took what was there. And then the way that Baylor was defending him opened up some opportunities for him to make some plays with his legs. And so what we saw, Ryan, was he avoided the big mistakes. He made plays when he needed to make plays, and he put that team on his shoulders, and they went on the road and beat Baylor 36-25 in a game that really they controlled from start to finish. And he was able to win without being at his best. Yes. And that's the thing. When he was on, they could play with anybody. But when he was off, they could lose to anybody. And he showed me last week because, Central Michigan, Arizona State, and Arkansas Pine Bluff are not tests for Oklahoma State. They're just not. Baylor on the road was a test. Now, Baylor's not as good as they were last year, but it's still a test, Ryan. And they passed the test with flying colors, in my opinion, offensively. And their defense showed a little bit better, more improvement, and that's going to be the key for me. Texas Tech is not a team that look, they're like you said, they're pesky. Tough win over Houston, 33-20. They lost by 13 to NC State, but that was I felt a more competitive game than the final score. I don't know if you agree with that, Ryan, but I thought just how the game played out, I thought it was more competitive than final score. Then they bounce back from that, beat Texas 37-34, and they lost 37-28 to Kansas State, but they hung in there. They play with Kansas State. I just think this game they're going to get smacked a little bit. I think this just because I just don't think they have the offensive firepower. I think Donovan Smith, Ryan, you pointed out him to me, so I watched him a little bit this week. He's a pretty talented kid. The problem is he has got a little bit of Spencer Sanders in him, in my opinion. He is now what Spencer Sanders used to be. He'll make some throws where like, wow, that was a big-time throw. Kid's got 7 interceptions so far this year in 5 games. Right? That's my problem. So I think that's going to come back to haunt them this week against Oklahoma State. I agree with you. I think Oklahoma State rolls. How about Kansas State, Iowa State?
That one's a tough one, man, because they are kind of similar football teams in the sense that they play really good defense and they try to they establish the run. I mean, on Iowa State's side of the things, you got Jaleel Brock, who's had some good moments this year. Kansas State, of course, they have Deuce Vaughn, and Adrian Martinez has really played well over the last couple games. Ultimately, I'm going to ride the hot hand there. I think that both teams are competitive and play good defense for the most part. I'm going to take what Adrian Martinez is doing right now, as scary as that sounds, because I think that he's given them a dynamic element as a runner. Deuce Vaughn's a good football player. I take Kansas State in this game just because I don't think that Iowa State has enough offensively.
I think Iowa State's in trouble. I do.
Ooh.
I think Matt Campbell did some nice things at Iowa State, but he missed an opportunity last year. He had a very veteran team, veteran quarterback, one of the best running backs in college football, veteran receivers, and they just couldn't take advantage. And they went, 7-6 last year?
Something like that.
They're 3-2 now. Ohio stinks. Southeast Missouri State's a FCS team. They beat Iowa 10-7. Got outplayed by Baylor at home. Couldn't move the ball on Kansas last week. I mean, that's the only time Kansas has looked good on defense all year was last week against Iowa State. I think they're in trouble. I do. Because after this, they got to go to Texas. Then they're home against Oklahoma, home against West Virginia, at Oklahoma State, home against Texas Tech, and then at TCU. If they don't win this game at home against Kansas State, they may not make a bowl game this year. And I think at that point in time, a lot of shine is off of Matt Campbell, right? Because he raised the bar, and now he hasn't been able to live up to the bar that he set. And I think they're going to fall back down, in my opinion. So they need this game. If they win this game, now they're 4-2. And then you maybe you lose to Texas next week. Next week you're 4-3, but then you got Oklahoma and West Virginia at home. You can win those games. You can beat Texas Tech at home. Now all of a sudden they may have a chance to win 7 games this year, and then go to a bowl game and go 8-5. And then it's like, okay, yeah, this is what Iowa State's supposed to be. 7 and 8 wins this year, in my opinion, after you lost Breece Hall and Brock Purdy, is a pretty good year for Oklahoma State. But I could see the opposite happening, and I think this game is going to be the trigger for one of those two directions. It's a lot like we talked about with Notre Dame, Ryan, is how that game goes could potentially send this team in opposite direction, similar to what we said about Oklahoma, right? And so I think this is a big, big game for Iowa State. Big game for Iowa State. And I'm going to say this too. It's a big game for Kansas State because what we have seen from Kansas State in recent years, even under Chris Kleiman, who I like, is they have not been able to follow up some of their big wins and their big runs with keeping it going.
Stacking
right?
it.
Yes. And so, I look at this year and they had the blowout win over Missouri, and then you fall to Tulane the next week. Well, you can live with that now because Tulane's turned out to be Willie Fritz is doing a really nice job at Tulane right now. They're 4-1. They have a win over Houston, a win over Kansas State. They dropped the game at home to Southern Miss. That's not a good win, but that's a bad loss, but not as bad as it looked at the time. But they followed that up with the Oklahoma win, and then they bounced back with a quality win over Texas Tech. Now, can they go on the road and keep that rolling or not? That's, to me, something we need to learn a little bit about them, in my opinion. Yep. So I definitely want to see that play out, Ryan. We do have some super chats down here. A couple super chats from Tyler Evans. He says, thank you for the super chat, Tyler, for both of them. Or actually, no, we have Tyler Evans and Tyler Smith. So two different Tylers. I apologize. Tyler Evans with a super chat. Favorite game you guys watched last week, and how about that Thursday night game last night? I'll be honest with you. I did not watch it. Ryan, you know this. I don't watch NFL really. I don't have time for it. I didn't even realize they were on until one of my wife's employees she's like, yeah, so-and-so, don't say her name. She's out this week. I'm like, why? She's like, she's in Colorado for the Broncos-Colts game. It's like, okay, I didn't know the Broncos were playing the Colts, first of all. I didn't know it was last night until I saw a score update on coming across on Twitter. And I was like, oh, okay, Broncos are playing.
You didn't miss much.
That's what I heard. I saw I saw the final score, and this is like, oh my gosh, it's disgusting. But what was your favorite game last week, Ryan, that you got a chance to watch? There were several. There's some really good football games last week. There really were. What was your favorite games from last week?
I was like flipping back and forth. I think the Oklahoma game was probably my favorite though, just because I was like, I was in utter disbelief of what I was watching from TCU, man. I'm just like Kendre Miller, Max Duggan, Savion Williams had a couple big catches for them, had a touchdown. Tay Barber, Davian Davis, or whatever his name is, the other slot receiver. Like, it was just ridiculous to watch what TCU did to Oklahoma, man. Like, I just could not believe it. It was bizarre.
That's kind of how I felt about the A&M Mississippi State game.
I didn't see any of that game.
I enjoyed watching Mississippi State just outplay them for 4 quarters. I really did. That was very enjoyable.
Ole Miss Kentucky was last week, right?
Mm-hmm.
I watched
that was a good game.
Yeah, that was a good football game. And big sack at the end. Will Levis has to hold on to the football at the end there because they had a chance to win. But Ole Miss is a decent football team, man. Yes. They got some guys. Defensively, Ole Miss has all of a sudden gotten a few defensive linemen in there. And Jackson Dart didn't have a great game, but he's played pretty well in spurts, and they have a really nice running game, obviously, with Quinshawn Junkins and Zach Evans. So tough football team Ole Miss has this year, it seems.
It wasn't as good of a weekend as I hoped it would be, Ryan. Some of the games that I hoped would be good. I hoped that Arkansas would give Bama a better game. And Bama's just not as much fun to watch when Bryce Young doesn't play. This particular team isn't. But Jalen Milroe did some nice things with his legs in the second half. Kentucky Ole Miss was a good game. I thought Oklahoma State was a really fun game to watch. Outside of that, there really weren't a ton of games. Like I said, the one you mentioned, TCU, Oklahoma, and then obviously the one I mentioned with Mississippi State and A&M were fun to watch. I didn't enjoy watching what Illinois did to Wisconsin because I just knew what we were watching. I knew we were watching the end of Paul Chryst. I have a lot of respect for Paul Chryst. I really do.
Yeah, I didn't watch that one. You texted me about it, and I was like, "Wait, that's 31-10. Like that's insane."
It got ugly fast. It really did. I mean, his time was over. I mean, the program's not going in the right direction. I didn't think it was going to I didn't think it was going to happen or should happen when it did. But when you lose at home that bad to Illinois, whose head coach is Brett Bielema, there's just no coming back from that.
Brett Bielema's doing a pretty solid job in
nice
Illinois.
Well, that was another game I was going to ask you about. Illinois is at home against Iowa. Illinois has a chance to go to 5-1. if they can win this football game, Ryan. Can they beat Iowa at home? I think they can.
They can. Yeah, they can. Because, I mean,
Yeah.
Iowa's just so anemic on offense, right? So, like,
Yeah.
I think every game's going to be tight, even if they do win. So, Illinois can, man. I'm still struggling with Tommy DeVito. I don't think he's a very good quarterback. But, I mean, Chase Brown is a stud at running back. Their offensive line is playing pretty well in Illinois, and their defense is good, man. Like, defense is really good. So, I'm not worried about Iowa scoring at all. It's just have a hard time trusting Tommy DeVito a little bit.
But see, here's where I think that I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, is because I don't think, well, who do you trust more, Tommy DeVito or Spencer Petras?
Yes.
That's
sure.
That's where it comes down to me.
Spencer Petras, out of the 130 whatever FBS teams, he might be the low 5 of quarterbacks that I trust.
I haven't seen a worse one yet. Well, no, I'm sorry. Yes, I have. It's a kid we were talking about earlier from San Diego State, Braxton Burmeister. He's pretty terrible. Yeah. To me, I think they showed last week that is, I mean, Wisconsin's a pretty good defense. Mm-hmm. And they asked Tommy DeVito, look, dude, we don't need you to make a bunch of throws. Just move the chains. Don't make mistakes. He went 18 to 24 for 167 yards, and they ran the football. I mean, that to me is the recipe for this football team. And if they can score 34 on Illinois, then they can score 20 to 24 on Iowa, which is enough for a win.
Yep.
But the thing is, I'm shocked at how good Illinois has been on defense, because they inherited a little better roster than I thought defensively, and some of the transfers they've gotten. They play really good defense. They gave up 23 in a loss to Indiana. And it was, I mean, it was not, I'm not putting all 23 or 23 of those points on the defense. Indiana had 39-yard scoring drive, a 52-yard scoring drive, a 50-yard scoring drive, a 54-yard scoring drive. A lot of, just it was more on the offense to me.
Right.
But I just, that's going to be an interesting game.
Illinois defense has a nice secondary, man.
Yeah.
Sidney Brown's a good safety, but I'm telling you, right, Devin Witherspoon is one of the best corners in college football. He's playing fantastic.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, man, he's a really good football player. He's going to get drafted probably top 100 this year, I think. He's had that type of year. And then they have a defensive tackle named Jerzon Newton, who I had no idea who he was, but he's been one of the most productive interior pass rushers in college football this year. So Illinois' got some guys on defense, man. They really do.
They are playing really good defense so far this year. Okay. Now, they haven't been tested by anybody yet, but this isn't going to be a test either. You know what I mean? So, Minnesota next week is going to be a little bit more of a test for them, but they've shut people down. I mean, they really have 3 points to Virginia, 10 to Wisconsin, 0 to Chattanooga, 6 to Wyoming. Been pretty good on defense.
I just want to talk every week about how bad Tony Elliott has turned that Virginia offense in a very short amount of time.
At Clemson. Like, look, I'm going to say right now, and I've said it a million times, Tony Elliott is not a great offensive mind. Jeff Scott is not a great offensive mind. They were great together.
Together, yeah. Yep.
And just apart, neither of them have ever been the same. I just haven't. And I mean, that offense was really good last year. And
passing, it was fantastic. This year,
they are bad. I mean, they have turned Brennan Armstrong into a very mediocre college quarterback.
Yep.
With everyone coming back.
They even got Lavelle Davis back from injury, who didn't play last year. Like, it didn't make any sense.
Brennan Armstrong right now is completing 52% of his passes, 4 touchdowns and 5 interceptions.
Last year he threw 31 to 10, I think.
Ryan, last year he had 4 games with at least 4 touchdowns.
Man.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like, goodness gracious.
And Dontavian Wicks can't catch a football this year. Like, he
did not have a single game. He did not have a single game that was 52% completions or lower. His lowest game last year was 55.6 against Duke. And this
Brennan Armstrong was good last year, man. He was good.
Yes, he has ran that program right into the ground. It really is offensive. It's really bad. And, I mean, the way that they're playing, Ryan, I don't see a lot of wins coming up on their schedule. I don't. I really don't. I mean, it's bad. Tyler Smith with Super Chat. Is this the week we finally see Lindsey get the deep ball? With the way BYU plays their defense, I believe we will see him a lot one-on-one. Possible. I mean, BYU does a pretty decent job of trying to prevent the deep ball, the way that they drop into coverage. I think if Braden's going to make some big play, I mean, we could see it, and that's why, what did we say yesterday, Ryan? Establish the run. Establish run, establish run, establish run. Don't let BYU get into their drop 8 kind of stuff. Make them get their safeties thinking downhill. If you can get their safeties thinking downhill, then yeah, you can take one over the top. There's no doubt.
Yep.
I think more likely is what we'll see is something like an over route, a cross, something like that, where Braden gets free and catches it on the run and then goes that way if he's going to make a big play. But I'm going to be honest, I would rather see him just flat beat somebody on a post route and go for a touchdown. If Drew Pine can drop back and rip off a post route and Braden Lindsey catches it on the run and scores a long touchdown, that's going to be something that you want on film.
Yes.
No doubt. I just don't know if this is the week that we see it just because of the way that they play.
It's almost happened every week.
Yeah.
Maybe. We'll see.
Yeah. I'm just mean the structure of the way that they play defense is what it was where I'm coming from.
Oh no, I'm just saying to Tyler, like, is it going to happen this week? I mean, it could have happened almost every single week this year so far.
He was open for a deep ball against Ohio State. He was open for a couple deep balls against Marshall. He was open for a deep ball against Cal. I mean, it's been there. Just haven't been able to get him the football. So we shall see. Yep. But thank you for that super chat. Here we go. Irish Blooded over under on how many times Tobias is targeted? 1.5. Where are you going with Ryan on this one?
I mean, I'll go under because I have no reason to think that it's over. But if it's under and it's 1, that's better than it has been. So that's positive.
Well,
movement.
I will say this: if the game gets played the way you think it could, with Notre Dame blowing him out, then I do think they'll get him in and get him some targets.
If he gets snaps in this football game, then I'll say it'll be over because I have a hard time believing that they're again going to just trot him out there for 1 or 2 plays and not let him get any action. Like get him some action, get him something.
This is a funny comment. Derek Colmer said Russell Wilson is trying to enter the transfer portal.
Man, it's not great.
Nobody's taking that contract. There's no doubt about that.
How bad are some of these veteran quarterbacks that switch teams this offseason, man? Because, I mean, as bad as Russell Wilson was, Matt Ryan was equally as bad last night. Yeah. He is cooked, man. Matt Ryan is bad now.
But how old is Matt Ryan?
He's like 38, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that
37, 38.
Minute. Yeah, he's 37.
Yeah.
That dude's old. Yeah.
Oh, he is old. He is old, but man, he looks.
I was listening to some analysis and I forget who it was, but they said that the O-line for
they had to put the Colts.
Colts hasn't been very good this year.
Well, they had especially last night, they had to put the rookie Bernard Raymond in the game, and he was just outmatched, man. He gave up like 3 sacks and had 2 holding penalties or something. Quentin Nelson actually had a bad game last night. He was not good last night for Indianapolis. So
here's a question. Irishman 7114. Speaking of Colorado, did y'all see the Scared Straight SEC short? Those guys are hilarious. Did you see that, Ryan?
I didn't.
It was hilarious. You've got to watch it. First of all, you've just got to watch the SEC shorts. They bring it every week. But they basically did a thing with Georgia where they tried to scare him straight, and so it's like he goes into this basement and it's like UConn, and I'm trying to think who the other team was, and and they're like making fun of George, like, how could you do this? And like trying to, it's kind of like, that where they put kids in prison and they try to scare them straight with that. It was like kind of similar to that. And, because of how bad they played against Missouri. And he's like, y'all aren't even Power 5 teams. I'm like, oh, he doesn't respect. And they're like, bring out the buff. And he's like, the buff. And this big guy comes out and he's wearing a Colorado shirt. He takes the Georgia guy, like picks him up, slams him up against the wall. He's like, we used to be where you were, national champs and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, now look at us. It's just like, it just scared him straight, and then it was just really funny. But they do such good work. They really do. I love those guys. They're hilarious. It's like every week. It's like just every time they come out, it's like they just bring it. They're phenomenal. They're a lot of fun. So you'll have to watch it, Ryan. Subscribe to them on Twitter and you'll see it. It's great stuff. It's great stuff. All right, so the next question that we have here, comment from USMA 87. I really, really appreciate this. He says, don't forget to check out CFB Nation pods. I'm enjoying them. I appreciate that very much. The guys have done a great job. The Sporting News guys have done a great job. Bill Troche and Bill Bender. They do 2 shows a week. We're going to now put one out on Tuesday and one on Wednesday. Before we were going Wednesday and Thursday, but we're going to put the breakdown of the previous week's game, the latest news. They've been talking about a lot of the coaching firings. We'll put those out on Tuesday at 11, around 11 every week. And then, of course, their preview of the upcoming games goes out on Wednesday. So definitely make sure that you subscribe to the CFB Nation podcast and get that checked out as well. So Ryan had to leave, so you can go subscribe to SEC Shorts on Twitter. So we appreciate that.
Or so my laptop didn't die because the charger wasn't plugged in.
There you go. That too. Kyle Wade says over under on total touches for Chris Tyree at 18.5.
18.5 is a good number. I'll go slightly under.
Yeah,
I
me
think
too.
that again, it's with the balance we've seen over the last couple weeks, right? Estimate getting, I think he got 17 carries last week. I know Logan Diggs had 10 carries plus a couple catches, obviously. I think we're going to see a very balanced attack from the running backs moving forward. So I'll say under on the 18.5.
There we go. So B. Ryan, Brandon Plenzer says, B. Ryan, does Jacob Lacey forfeit his scholarship by stepping away from the team? Technically, I believe that Notre Dame, I'd have to look at the rule. I believe Notre Dame could take his scholarship away, I believe, but I don't think there's any chance that they would. They're not angry with Jacob that he's doing this. They're disappointed. They didn't want him to do it, but there's no anger there. I think they understand it. And they don't like it. They don't agree with it, but they understand it. And Jacob's done everything right at Notre Dame up to this point in time. I completely disagree with Jacob's decision. I do. I don't think he should do this. I think he should play the season out. You never know when your opportunity may come. And then, if you want to transfer somewhere next year, then transfer somewhere next year. I'm not a fan of walking away from a team that you made a commitment to. I'm sorry. You weren't promised more playing time. You decided to be a part of this team and you decided to walk away. Having said that, I still think Jacob's a great kid. I think he's making a bad decision. I do. And I think it's one he's going to look back as he gets older and regret. And I was having this conversation with my dad last night, and and I understand I understand where he's coming from. I've kind of been there on a much smaller scale. But, the one thing I can always look back on and say, you know what, no matter what happened to me, I never quit. I didn't quit. I didn't walk away from my team. Right. Mm-hmm. Because you're punishing your teammates for what you perceive the coaches are doing. And even though the teammates are understanding of it, I don't agree with it. I just don't. But I respect Jacob, and I'd be really ticked off if Notre Dame took a scholarship away. And there's no way they would ever do that. First of all, there's no way Marcus Freeman would do that. Number two, I don't know if the administration would let him do that if he wanted to do that. So either way, I don't see it happening. So I haven't even really took time to look into the rule officially, but I believe like when Lawrence Keys left last year, there was conversation that they could take his scholarship away. They didn't. So I'd have to look into that a little bit more.
Yep.
John Mayo with a comment. He says, BYU has 0 trenches. We're going to bully these cats, 300 rushing yards easy. There's no way Notre Dame easily gets 300 yards rushing. I mean,
Brian, I said this, right? Like, I think that the BYU defensive line it's definitely not the best I've seen, right? Like, it's not a great defensive line, but I mean, saying that they have nothing is very disrespectful to Tyler Beatty. Yeah, I think Tyler Beatty is a good football player. I think there's a couple of good players on that defensive line, but it's not a great unit for BYU. So I agree partly, but I mean, 300 yards easy. Come on, man. Nah.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's a disrespect to what BYU is as a team, but we'll find out. Anthony Solomon says it doesn't look good nationally if BYU loses 2 of the 3 big games, especially losing big. As a Notre Dame fan, I would be happy. I know that I can count on the media to diminish the result is my point. And he's referring to somebody said somebody else. But I don't really care about what the national media says about Notre Dame about this win. I think this is a game that Notre Dame needs. If they have a big one over BYU, yes, they'll talk down BYU, but I think they'll still get plenty of praise for how well Notre Dame played. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, you need to have more film of you being dominant that you can show recruits. Hey, look, we had a bad start, but we're good now. We've dominated North Carolina, who's 4-1. And then we didn't even talk about that when we were breaking down that game, Ryan. If North Carolina goes on the road and beats Miami 2 weeks after Notre Dame destroyed them, and then they also destroyed Virginia Tech, that's a great sign for Notre Dame. And, it makes them look better. And I love Arkansas and what they're doing, but I will be rooting for BYU next week when they play Arkansas at home. There's no doubt about it. Irish Blooded asks, bigger margin of victory this weekend, the Notre Dame game or the Kansas game? You were about the same on both for your official predictions, right, Ryan?
I was, yeah. So the predictions I put out on the site, I had Notre Dame with a larger margin of victory than Kansas, than Kansas losing to TCU. But when I think about both games, I really do think that TCU and Notre Dame have a chance to run away with it a little bit and kind of have a good little. So I honestly, Irish Blood, I think it's kind of close. I'll end up saying. I'll say TCU slightly, just because I think that Kansas is a little more smoke and mirrors than BYU is. So I'll just leave it there.
USMA 87 said, "Who saw Syracuse doing so well?" He did.
I did say they were decent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you thought they'd be a better team this year. Now,
Yeah.
5-0. I mean, they haven't really played anybody great. The Purdue win
Yeah.
was good. I think that was a good win. The Purdue win was
I
a good
probably would have
win.
said 4-1 in the
Right.
first
But
5.
yeah,
not 5-0.
Ryan, you talked about how good their offensive line was. You loved their running game. You liked their defense. You and I did a show this summer where we were talking about the opponents, and you kept talking about like this team has a couple pros in their secondary and some good veteran. We did our all opponent team, and we had 2 Syracuse defensive players on our all opponent team. We had the linebacker Jones, and we had the cornerback Garrett Williams. We're both on our all opponent teams.
Yeah, and they have Darian Chestnut, who's another good corner. They have Marlo Wax, who's playing good football at linebacker. They have Matthew Bergeron, who's going to get drafted pretty high at left tackle. Sean Tucker. I mean, it's a decent team.
Oh, and that's what I was going to say. When we got into best position groups, we had the conversation that there's an argument to be made that the best cornerback tandem on Notre Dame's schedule, this was preseason, could be Syracuse.
I still believe that.
Ryan has been talking about Syracuse for a while. Outside of that, not many people. I didn't think they'd. I mean, I thought they'd. Look, again, they're 5-0. Their only road win and road game is at UConn. But they dominated Louisville. They had a good win over a Purdue team that's decent, right? Purdue just went on the road and beat Minnesota. Yeah. And you know what I mean? And then they had an ugly win over Virginia, but they got it done. And then they blew out Wagner, who's like 0-4. And at the FCS
Wagner's
level,
so bad, man, so bad.
So we'll see. They got to bye this week, and then they're home against NC State, and then at Clemson, home against Notre Dame. So we're going to find out over the next month just how good Syracuse is. Then they're at Pitt, home against Florida State, at Wake, at BC. So this 5-0 start could look not good by the end of the season, but they're doing some good things. My question is, can Garrett Schrader continue what he's doing? As the competition amps up on defense? That's the question I have, because they haven't played anybody that I think has a pulse as any good on defense so far this season.
Yeah. That's the big question. I do feel good for Dino Babers, though, after what he's done over the last couple of years. It's nice that he's gotten off to a good start, because I have to think the seat's getting a little hot for him, man. Just had to have been before the season. But
I had reached out to some people that are familiar with that situation to kind of find out, like, how's this guy still have a job?
Yeah.
Right. Like, and from what I was told is, here's why. They're willing to give him a much longer leash because he is incredibly well respected at that school. Cares about the kids.
Seems like a good dude.
Right.
Yeah.
Getting academics, treats people right. I mean, that's those things that I've heard. Now, not always the most organized head coach. There's been some staff issues at times, but very well respected guy. And the 2018 season was that, combined with the 2018 season, was going to give them the benefit of the doubt to try to turn it around. But I was also told that if things go south this year, that could be the final straw. So this is a much needed start. And, again, between NC State at home, Notre Dame at home, Florida State at home, they need to upset one of those 2 teams. And then between at BC, at Wake, at Pitt, they need to at least win one of those 2 games. If they do that, they're 7-5. They're in a bowl game, and people are happy, in my opinion. Not in love with it, but they're happy. And then if you can pull off a couple of those upsets, extra upsets, and now all of a sudden you're 8-4. But that's why beating Purdue was important, because 5-0 is, it's a good look. They're ranked. They're ranked in the top 25. And they don't play this week, so unless NC State loses this weekend, which is possible, they could be playing in back-to-back top 25 games, potentially. So, because then they play Clemson the week after that.
Yeah.
So
there's just a lot more NFL talent on that team than people give them credit for. So,
and you have been saying that since before they started 5-0. Market-wise says, based on what we've seen in totality, we should still be in show-me mode. This game could change that perspective quite a bit in the right direction. He's talking about the Notre Dame BYU game, and that's kind of where I'm coming from, Ryan, is
agreed.
This game will tell us a lot about this team. I'm going to be a believer in this team if they come out and do what we believe they're capable of, and I'll feel very good. We won't be talking about show me against Stanford and UNLV the next 2 weeks if they come out and handle their business against BYU.
I agree.
But for this game, yes, he's correct. This is still show me mode.
It's a big
There's
game.
no doubt.
Coming out of the bye week, feeling decent about yourself after the North Carolina game. It's a huge game. No doubt about it.
Yep. Siggy13 says, Brian and Ryan, is there a big difference the way the staff is handling these big venue away games compared to Kelly regime, or is that pretty uniform across the NCAA? Right? I think everybody has their differences on how they handle road games. I don't know if there's huge differences. I think that what changes is more of this team plays a little bit more so far. Plays a little bit more fire and passion than Brian Kelly's teams do, and I think that's really important on the road. Really important on the road, especially when you're playing a good football team. Is you got to come out with a little bit more intensity. You've got to be able to match not just the intensity of the team, but the crowd. And I think this team has done a pretty good job of that because they came out playing hard against North Carolina. They didn't execute great early, but they were playing very hard. I mean, you could see that early on. They were playing very hard.
Yeah, I guess I was curious if this question was also referring to like the bed check stuff and getting in at a certain time. Like I didn't know if that's what that was.
I don't think that's
about.
maybe. I don't know if that stuff matters a ton to be. I mean, unless you're just doing nothing, which obviously would be a problem. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But I mean, that would also be an interesting one. There'd be Yep. So let's go here to this next one, Ryan. Alan Kren says, so BYU going to handle 87 Michael Mayer?
They're gonna have a plan for him. I mean, handle him that's a big word. That makes it sound like they took him to the woodshed, right? Like they dominated him. I don't think anybody's gonna handle Michael Mayer. It's just, can they limit Michael Mayer? Like that's the biggest thing. I think they'll have a plan. I mean, they have a couple talented linebackers that have some length to them that I think that they'll be able to try to limit him. But I mean, at the end of the day, handle, I think, is a little too strong because I think Michael Mayer is one of the best players in college football. So I don't think anybody's going to handle him.
Yes. I will. Here's the thing, Ryan, for me, of all the teams on the schedule, BYU is one of the teams that is personnel wise in best position to handle him.
Yep.
Because of the length and the type of cover players they have at linebacker. Now, can one of those guys handle Michael Mayer? No, but between bracketing and some different things, I think BYU will have a Michael Mayer plan. Yes, I don't think that they can, like you said, handle him, not one-on-one, but they have the personnel to limit his effectiveness. Yeah, I do, but I also think that then opens up opportunities for other people.
Yes.
So this question was asked. Sam Tyrell was asking when we were talking about our predictions earlier on, how many picks do you have? This week we did 4, including the Notre Dame game. We did Notre Dame and BYU. We did Texas, Oklahoma. We did LSU, Tennessee, and we did TCU, Kansas was the other game we did also. Yep. And then on the season, we'll have 4 to 5 a week. But right now I'm 20-4 and Ryan is 18-6, and we're both 2-2 for Notre Dame because we include our Notre Dame predictions on there. So I'm 18-2 in all of college football. Ryan is 16-4, right? And then I'm 2-2 for. I mean, basically my record for Notre Dame is going to be whatever the team's record is. I mean, it's just the reality of it. So, and then Vince and Sean Stiers both are 3-1 picking Notre Dame games because they both picked Notre Dame they both picked Ohio State in the opener.
Imagine picking against Notre Dame.
Yep. Knuckleheads. I mean, they were right and everything, but still.
Who cares about being right?
Yeah, exactly. Milton Fan 15. I saw this question earlier, Ryan, and it was interesting. Milton Fan 15 says, B. Ryan, what does Logan Diggs do that Estime can't do or doesn't do as well? And I keep hearing they complement each other, but all I see is a backup depth piece from Logan Diggs. There are several people that I've seen express this. I don't get it. I don't get what people are missing with Logan Diggs. I wonder if sometimes the fact that he's always a threat to transfer has soured some people on him, and so they pick apart his game. But I don't know how you can watch him last week and not – you want to know how he's a compliment? Just go watch the North Carolina game, man. I mean, that's the reason. That's how he compliments. You're not going to be running wheel routes with Audric Estime, right? And catching the ball down the field. He's a legitimate pass game weapon. Estime is more of what we've seen. Swing routes, angle routes, little quick stuff. He's a traditional running back as a pass catcher. Logan Diggs is also more elusive than Audric. Audric is kind of a downhill guy. He can kind of do one cut, but Logan has shiftiness. Logan is their most elusive running back. I mean, even compared to Tyree. I think from a style of play and as a runner, I think Estime and Tyree are more similar than Estime and Diggs as far as running style, right? Both Estime and Tyree, both one-cut guys, both counter inside zone guys, off-tap mid-zone guys, right? Estime is more of a stretch, let the things develop and then find a crease. He can make you miss in space. I think he is absolutely a compliment to those two guys, and I'm not quite sure what you would see that would make you, especially after the North Carolina game. Like I could understand this question before the Carolina game, but I'm a little puzzled by the question after the North Carolina game because I think that game was the perfect example of why Audric Estime is such a good compliment, not just to Audric Estime, but also to Chris Tyree.
Yeah, I think they all complement each other really well. I mean, if Milton fan, like if I wanted to quantify him, right? I mean, I think Brian did a really good job of it, but just kind of reiterate again. I mean, Audric Estime is kind of that one cut downhill hammer, but I think that he has some decent foot quickness in the hole. So I think he can make a second level defender miss. Logan Diggs is kind of shifty, make you miss in the hole, can run a little more routes than what your typical running back can do. And then Tyree's the lightning, obviously. Tyree is also a one cut and go guy, though, right? Like he's not a make you miss a ton in open space. He can do it some, of course, but he wants to get vertical and he wants to be really, really fast. So I think they all complement each other really well. I mean, Brian, I have never once said that like this is a two-headed running back situation and then there's a depth piece behind him. Like this is a three-headed system, in my opinion. I think they can all contribute and they all do things that are very different, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think you nailed it. Next question that we have, Brent Smith. Why were Jacob Lacey's reps so inconsistent from game to game? Ohio State 29, 11 for Marshall, 2 sacks first Cal, and he played, I think, 24 sacks first Cal, and then 9 snaps at North Carolina. I can explain to you why. I just don't agree with it. They basically, in the opener, they rotated a lot of guys in, but after that, they went very offense or pass game versus run game oriented game plans. The Marshall game, so I was told this by several people, that they switched game plans in the middle of the week against Marshall. Early in the week, they were run-oriented game plan, and Jacob had a lot of snaps early that week, and because Jason Adamiola didn't practice a lot that week because he was resting, getting a little banged up against Ohio State. And then they switched it middle of the week and went to more of a pass-oriented game plan, which I didn't understand. I mean, the run-oriented game plan should have been your deal because you come up tight, play the run, and make Henry Colombo beat you down the field. It was a really bad game plan by Al Golden, really bad game plan, and not in a poorly called game. Now, he's recovered from that, and he's been pretty good every other game, right? I mean, people have bad days, guys. I mean, and good coaches have bad days. But that was a bad day, a bad week for Al Golden, in my opinion. And so when they go pass-oriented game plans like they did against North Carolina, they're just not playing. They don't think Jacob Lacey can rush the quarterback. Now, I think that's a little nutty, especially after he had 2 sacks, including on a beautiful spin move against Cal. It's not like he just bull rushed a guy and drove him into the quarterback, or Isaiah Foskey had a great rush and then they just ran him into Jacob Lacey twice. His first sack was the best move we've seen on a sack all year from a Notre Dame defensive lineman. So I don't agree with it, Ryan, but that's the justification. When they play teams that are more run-oriented, 12 personnel-oriented, they're going to play Jacob. When they play teams that are more 11 personnel-oriented, they're going to play other guys. I don't agree with it, but that's the reasoning for it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't going to change. So thoughts on that?
I mean, that's it, man. I mean, that's kind of the context to it, right? I mean, we can sit here and we can disagree with it all we want. And I know that me and Brian do, right? Like we talked about it yesterday on the phone. Like I think Jacob Lacey should have played more, but the fact is that that's how the coaching staff sees it. That's the game plan they implemented. And that's why it was limited in those instances. Again, don't agree with it, but that's why it happens.
And even if that's true, which I don't agree with it, you still need to play Chris Smith and Jacob Lacey more because you do not want Howard Cross at 275 pounds as a nose guard, or Jason Adamiola as a 285-pound 3 technique who's had a shoulder injury in the past, averaging 45 to 50 snaps a game, which right now they are. Yep. That's going to hurt you in November. It's going to hurt you in November.
We talked about that too on the phone yesterday. Like I think that we should have been closer to a 50-50 split or a 45-55 split. Like I think that Jacob Lacey should have played a lot more football. Would agree. Totally agree.
Yep. But I can also explain it, and that's the reason why.
Right.
So we'll see. Michael Johnson with a question. Well, Brian Ryan, what is the best job available right now in college football? So, Ryan, it's Nebraska is open, right? Mm-hmm. You've got Wisconsin is now open. Georgia Tech is now open. What are the other jobs? Arizona State is now open. There's a 5th job I thought that's open, and I'm drawing a blank.
Boise State?
No, they didn't fire their coach, did they?
Not
Unless
yet.
They did it this past week. I'm trying to think of what the other job is that's open right now. and I'm completely drawing a blank right now, but I could have swore that when we were talking the other day that there were 5 jobs available. So we said Nebraska, Wisconsin, Georgia Tech,
Colorado. Someone
There
just
you go.
said, yeah.
There you
Yep.
go.
Thanks, Archer.
Okay, thank you for that. So yeah, I knew there was a 5th job up. And
Carl
so
Durrell just got fired. Yep.
rank those 5, Ryan. Best to fit 5. Let's go 5 to 1. We can talk about the best one last. I think I'll give my opinion, right?
Yep.
I think Colorado's the worst job.
Oh, easy. It's not even close.
Yeah.
That is a
Here's
barren wasteland. Yeah.
There's just not a lot of talent in Colorado anymore. They don't produce a lot of talent. It's a very weird school. It's like if you took Cal Berkeley and put it in the mountains, that's the kind of school it is, right? Which, whatever, it is what it is. But that is going to hurt you in attracting certain types of players from certain parts of the country. Just is.
Yeah. Yep.
I love the Denver area. It's beautiful and all that, and that's very attractive. But Boulder's a weird place, and I've got a lot of warm feelings there. I drive through Boulder to go up to the spot where I proposed to my wife. We used to live out in Denver, so it is a beautiful area, but it's a very strange place. There's a lot of weird stuff going on there. The program hasn't been good, really consistently good for a long time, and I think the other part of it too, Ryan, is they leaving the Big 12 was even worse for them than it was for Nebraska. Yeah, look, Colorado which is weird because Colorado has really changed. Okay, talk politics for a second. Colorado has gone from a pretty right-leaning state to a very left-leaning state over the last 20 years because there's been a ton of California transplants into the state. The weird thing, however, is the athletics program, or at least the football program, has struggled to recruit football players from California, which I find very strange. You'd think that it would work, right? And I think that's a part of the reason that Colorado sought the Pac-12 was because they felt that they had more in line with the West Coast than the Southwest. This hasn't worked out that way for their football program. So I think those are the factors why I think this is a bad job. I don't think they pay well either. Facilities are just kind of okay. It's a bad job in my opinion, and I don't see it getting any better. I don't.
And the previous regime has left them with nothing, right? I can't see them getting a quick, not even a quick turnaround, but to a respectable quick, because it's bad right now, man. There's not much talent there at all.
Yeah, really not. What's your 4th job? I'm sticking in the conference. I'm going Arizona State next.
Oh, I'm not going Arizona State. They're higher up my list. I would probably go Georgia Tech. I think Georgia Tech's in a tough spot. I don't think they have a ton of talent. I also think that I know that there's a lot of talent in the South, but you're still in the same state as Georgia, right? Sure. So you're not going to get first hands in Georgia type of thing. You can probably get some decent recruits that maybe get undervalued a little bit, but I think Georgia Tech's in a pretty tough spot right now.
Yeah. For me, Ryan, I think Georgia Tech's a really good job. I do for the right coach. Yes, you're in the same state with Georgia, but Georgia in the Southeast as a whole is one of those states where you can take all the scraps that Georgia doesn't want and still have a pretty good football team in the ACC, right? Georgia Tech doesn't have a lot of talent, but they have better talent than what we've seen from them record-wise the last couple of years. I just don't think Jeff Collins is a very good coach. Also, I think Atlanta is a place that Georgia Tech has been and will continue to be a transfer portal haven in that it's a place that's, with the right coach, will always be attractive to transfer kids that aren't making it at their school. Miles Sims goes to Michigan from Georgia, doesn't make it, comes back, right? I'm drawing Kenyatta Watson goes to Texas, doesn't make it, comes back to Georgia Tech. Derek Allen goes to Notre Dame, doesn't make it, comes back. There's always going to be those kind of kids for the right job. I think, because you're a hop and a skip from Florida, you're a hop and a skip from the Carolinas up to Virginia, you're a hop and a skip from Alabama, which is greatly increasing its talent level. And of course, there's a lot of kids in Georgia. Whereas Arizona is ascending as a state, producing talent, but it's still nowhere near what Georgia is. And yes, they have California, but Georgia Tech can also go down into Florida. And also, Tempe it's a pretty cool college town, but I don't know if Arizona is a place where they can really go outside the Southwest to get kids. I think Georgia Tech academically also has a lot to offer, where they can kind of go up to Ohio and go up to the Northeast, and they can even go out west a little bit if they get the right coaching staff. and get some kids because they can sell a pretty quality academic situation as well. So I actually really like Georgia Tech as a program. It's just one of those jobs, Ryan, where it's got to be the right guy. It's not a job that just anybody can go to. But if you get the right guy, I think he can have some success there. And then finally, I think the league is better. I think right now from a where you can kind of quickly ascend, in my opinion. And whereas the Pac-12, it's like with USC and UCLA out of the Pac-12, I don't know how attractive of a job that is. I mean, are you even going to know what conference you're going to be in 3 years if you take that job? And somebody said Deion to Georgia Tech. It's a good job for the right guy. It ain't the job for Deion. If I'm Deion Sanders, I don't think people appreciate how serious Deion is about building up the HBCU level schools. He's serious about that. Like, this isn't just a gimmick for him to recruit and build up a better job. Do I think Deion is forever going to stay at Jackson State? No. But I think he's going to be really picky about the kind of jobs he might leave them for. Do I think he'd be attracted to go to his alma mater? Yeah, I do.
100%.
I'd be shocked if Deion left for Georgia Tech. When he says the things he says about building up the HBCU level, I really think he means it. I really do. And I just don't think he's going to leave for just any job. I don't. And I definitely don't think he's going to leave anytime soon. I think he's going to at least – like, if he leaves Jackson State, it's going to be because he's built it up and he feels like there's a succession in place where they're going to continue going. I truly believe that. I think Deion's a pretty honest dude, right? I do.
Maybe a little too honest sometimes. Yeah.
I do. So anyway, we had another super chat there, Ryan, that I saw from Tyler Evans. Has a Notre Dame game ever made you guys cry?
When I was a young kid,
not as an adult, no.
Not as an adult, no. Not in the last 20 years, but like when I was a kid, yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, I cried I was 15 when they lost to Boston College, and I cried. I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you. I cried when they called the penalty on Rocket. I was so mad. There were more tears of anger. My defense, I was 12. But
I think I was 12 when they lost in the Bush Push game, and I definitely cried in that game, 100%. 100%.
But as an adult, no. I will say this. The first time I was on campus at Notre Dame, I got a little for a game in 2007. I got a little bit misty-eyed, but it was more of like, the Rudy's dad walking to the stadium, and this is the most beautiful thing these eyes have ever seen. You know what I mean? So like, it was kind of that kind of thing, but I wouldn't say that was a Notre Dame game that made me cry. It's just the magnitude of being on that campus is still an amazing thing, in my opinion.
Oh, sure is. Walking past the grotto always gets me, man. It's
beautiful. Yeah. There's no doubt. I mean, I'm not Catholic, but I as you know, Ryan, I believe in the power of prayer, and I've gone over there before and knelt down on the over there in the praying area and lifted people up in prayer, lifted myself up and my family. It's a very you can feel it. You can feel it there.
Well, the energy, and then leaving whenever it's like a night game when you leave and it's all illuminated and everything. It's awesome, man. It's really cool.
And you were not alone, Ryan, on the Bush Push. Connor Nepper says, I cried the Bush Push. Pryor was screaming in the street because we won the dang game. So, yeah. Father David Penny says, Brian, that happened to me at the Cal game this year, walking on the field on the Friday with my dad. Wow. Yeah. So, Drunk Vigo says, wait, Driscoll isn't Catholic? I've been pretty open about that for a long time. No, I'm not Catholic. So, yes, not Catholic. So, Tim Jenkinson says, Brian and Ryan, is putting Marist as a spy on Hall the way to go to contain him in the pocket and make him throw in the pocket with the way our corners are playing? Ryan, I answered that earlier in the week. I'm going to give you a crack at answering this question. See if you agree or disagree. Either way.
This is my thing with the spy stuff, right? At times it makes sense, right? And I will not push against it, but I'm not a big fan of like every down spy, right? Like every big pass play spy. I'm a big fan of mix and matching coverages, because if you're playing some zone coverage, you're not just going to have one defender with their eyes back to the quarterback. You're going to have a lot of defenders with your eyes back to the quarterback, right? So I think mixing up that type of stuff, spying occasionally, sure, and then finishing on the quarterback with four rushers, like that's the recipe to success. I don't think that you have to design a full game plan to say, hey, we're spying every critical third down, every obviously passing situation. We're going to spy on Jaron Hall. I don't think it's to that degree. I think that you occasionally, especially if Notre Dame's struggling with it, then sure, let's throw out a spy at some point, right? Let's do that. But mix and match coverages. Let's get some zone coverage. Let's get our eyes back to the quarterback and let's go make plays. That's my philosophy.
And if you're going to have a linebacker spying him, that would be my pick.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
If it is a linebacker, it's Marist. 100%.
Yeah. All right, next question from Irish Blooded. There's legit movement from boosters to buy out Jimbo for 2 losses this year. Just insane. But see, Irish Blood, I don't think it's for 2 losses this year. This is what Ryan and I said in the offseason when we were kind of making fun of all the hype about Jimbo, about Texas A&M being a top 10 team. I never bought that because my question was, what evidence do we have that he's done anything in A&M to deserve that? A 9-1 year during the COVID year? He hasn't earned, they didn't earn a top 10 status. They beat Alabama. They went 8-4. They lost to LSU and Mississippi State. They lost to Mississippi State, Ryan, last year at home. Right? Like they're just not good. But the buyout thing, here's why Jimbo Fisher is not getting bought out. I'm trying to see who sent me this earlier in the week, but this was absolutely insane. Ryan, was it you that sent me that? Somebody sent me the particulars on his buyout, and it was like
it's like 78 million, right, or something like that.
It's like then it goes down to like 68. It is like just absolutely insane. Yeah, the buyout numbers for him. Like, there's no way that to me, there's no way that they do that. I mean, I'm actually going to look. So it wasn't on my phone. So let me see if I can. I'm sure it'll be just a quick.
I saw it on Twitter, but I know what you're talking about. But
let's see here. Yeah. So if A&M fires him this year, he makes the buyout numbers $85.95 million. If they fire him after 23, it's $76.8 million. 24, then it drops down successive years, 67.55, 58.2, 48.7, 39.2, 29.5. So if they wait till the 2028 season, they still have to pay him $29.5 million. It goes down to $9.9 million in 2030, and they'd have to hold on to him till 2031 to not have to pay him anything as a buyout. As an insane contract. And you know what? You deserve it. Why the heck did you give him that kind of contract to begin with?
That's a good question.
He was getting fired at Florida State. You know what I mean? Like, come on. His agent deserves a huge raise. There's no question about that.
Sure does. He's living nice too right now.
Yeah. He makes Brian Kelly's buyout look like nothing. Tyler
funny.
Smith says, would you take Brennan Armstrong in the portal?
I don't think he has any eligibility left after this year. I could be wrong.
I think so. Let me look at that, Ryan. I think you're right. I think he is in his final year. So he is a 2018 guy. So he might have a 6th year. He's had some injury stuff. I'd have to go look and see. You know who has a 6th year eligibility, which will never happen under the current coaching staff? You'd have to have a change at offensive coordinator. But you know who has a 6 year of eligibility left, right?
Who's that?
Folgerkovic.
Folgerkovic? Yeah.
Yep.
I thought you were going to say Bo Nix.
No, I would never do that to you. That'd be like the ultimate troll job of you. I would never do that to you. Like, I think that would take you a couple days to emotionally and mentally recover from if I were to say that to you.
Sure would.
So yeah, I wouldn't do that to you. I'm not mean like that usually. Ryan B says 3 or 4 ranked teams will be unranked after this week. If Notre Dame wins handily, maybe a chance to be in the top 25. Possible.
It's possible. Yeah, it's very possible. Yeah.
I mean, there were some 2-loss teams. Weren't there some 2-loss teams in the top 25 last week, Ryan?
There was at least one, I think.
There was definitely a lot of 2-loss teams getting votes. There's no doubt about that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's possible. It's possible. Yeah, you had no 2-loss teams. Yes, Arkansas in the coaches poll had one. But you look at it now, the top 25, either LSU or LSU, LSU loses, they could drop out. There's Mississippi State, Kansas is at 19. If TCU beats them, they could fall out. I think they're going to need a couple more weeks to get in the top 25. But if Notre Dame just goes out and blasts BYU, would I be shocked if they get in the top 25? No. But keep in mind, they had 0 votes in the AP last week. 0.
Yeah.
Which I think is insane. Here's who had votes last week. Baylor had 88 votes. Why? Don't they have 2 losses?
I think so.
So Baylor was 27th. You have Arkansas at 29th, 2 losses. You have Florida at 31st, 2 losses. You have Minnesota after losing to Purdue was ranked. Tulane had 9 votes last week. North Carolina had 5 votes in the AP last week, who Notre Dame destroyed. And then A&M had 4 votes last week. Purdue had 2 votes, and Oklahoma had 2 votes. So
Oklahoma had 2 votes?
Yes. Yes.
That's dumb.
The coaches weren't even crazy enough. Well, actually, Oklahoma had 19 votes in the coaches poll, so I take that back. I saw the last 5 and didn't see Oklahoma. Notre Dame had 5 points in the coaches poll. But yes, it's so silly. This is why I'm glad these polls don't have any impact on anything, because it's just dumb. It's just dumb. And then I believe we're getting close to the end of the questions, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
We have a recruiting question here.
Okay.
This is from Brent Smith. He says, if we sign Jeremiah Love, Jaden Lamar, and Dylan Edwards, also factor in Jadarian Price's return, we'll have a 7-man running back room. Any chance we see a transfer from Diggs or Tyree? We answered this earlier in the week. I want to say this again. Dylan Edwards is not being recruited as a running back. So with that being said, Ryan, please answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, like Brian just said, that was the biggest point I wanted to make, is that it's not a 3-man class. That is a 2-man running back class of Jayden Lamar and Jeremiah Love. Jeremiah Love chooses Notre Dame, and Dylan Edwards is being recruited to be that slot receiver, gadget role, return man type of nuance to the Notre Dame team. So he is not factored into this. So 6-man group with Notre Dame is what it would be. Is there a possibility of someone transferring at some point? I don't want to speculate on it, right? Like there's always – I feel like we've been talking about Logan Diggs transferring for the last year or so. Could it happen? Who knows? All I know is that Dylan Edwards is not going to factor into the running back room.
Now, will Dylan Edwards line up in the backfield at times? Yes.
As he should.
Yes.
As he should.
Yes. He's not a running back. And why would Chris Tyree transfer? Like, he's going to be a major player for them next year. Now, Brent, I could see Logan Diggs transferring, but that's always going to be a concern with him. Yeah. And it may not even be, he could be starting and it's going to be a concern for him. I'm always going to be concerned about that, to be completely honest with you. I am. I hope that he doesn't, because I want to see him get his Notre Dame degree. I think he's a good football player. But none of those kids are going to transfer because they sign other kids that are 2 to 3 years behind them. Right. Especially with this staff's track record of playing freshmen. You know what I mean? So it's like, I wouldn't be worried. A freshman going to play for me? No way.
Hey, Audric Esme is a redshirt freshman. I know what you're talking about.
That's right. No, he's not, actually. He played 12 games last year.
I don't care.
Well, I mean, he's not a redshirt freshman.
Whatever makes my point correct, even if it's wrong.
It doesn't make your point correct. That was the most insane thing I've ever heard said on this show. Even if it's wrong, as long as it makes my point correct. Yeah. I don't think that means
I can spin it however I want, sir.
No, not really. Not really. Not going to allow that. False. All right. So here's a couple more. We had some good questions come in, so I want to get to. Brandon Platts Pietz says, Brian and Ryan, are you guys thinking finally to Lewis big drop to cornerback number 2 spot? I feel he has struggled. I want to make 2 comments on that, Ryan. I want to go, first of all, he has already been cornerback 2. Benjamin Morrison has started the last 2 football games. Yeah. He started against Cal and he started against North Carolina. I think with Clarence Lewis, what has happened is he had one bad play against North Carolina, and immediately everybody said, oh, that's Clarence Lewis again, because they have not heard his name all year. Clarence, the reason you haven't heard Clarence's name all year is because he's been really good so far this year. Mm-hmm. And he's been a really solid player. He's had, Ohio State didn't have a lot of success against him. Marshall didn't have hardly any success against him. He played well against Cal, and he had one bad play against North Carolina, and it was a bad play. He made a mistake. But Clarence has been really solid this year. He's not great, but he's been really solid. So, no, I don't agree that he struggled, Brandon, to be honest with you, but he is cornerback number 2. But he didn't get demoted necessarily because he wasn't playing well. It's just Benjamin Morrison's their best player at corner so far this year. I mean, outside corner. Tariq, I kind of view differently. I view Tariq as a slot corner. I'm talking about the outside corner, so I want to be specific there. He's just been their best cover player so far this year. And it started against Ohio State. I mean, he was the best corner cover guy against Ohio State as far as Benjamin Morrison. So, but yes, he is. Clarence has been cornerback 2 and has handled it well. But he's still playing, and he's going to play a lot. It's just he's not the starter, or at least hasn't been the starter. Although this is a game that I feel like is kind of more up in his wheelhouse, to be honest with you. Good route runners, not a bunch of burners, that kind of thing is really where he is. It's a good question by Connor Nepper, Ryan. He asks, do you guys believe this is a build year to the big games, even though we have a pretty tough remaining schedule, play younger guys so that they're ready going into next year?
I think you play your best team this year because if that's a young player, that's fine. I haven't given up on the year, though, Connor. I mean, it's still, like we talked about the standard a ton yesterday, right? And I think that there's still a standard always, right? So I'm not, and it's not like NFL teams do this sometimes, right? Because there's draft picks involved and it's the tanking thing, right? College football, you're not going to get a better draft pick if you don't do as well, right? If you lose some football games. So I still want Notre Dame to beat Clemson. I still want them to beat USC because I think that those are positive steps in the right direction. And I don't think it's about just setting you up for the next year. I think you try to win every single week. So I don't quite agree with that.
I think Notre Dame has a lot to play for still too, Connor. I think that this is a team that has a chance to go out and be a 10-2 team, earn some big wins. Because like when I first read the question earlier, I thought he was going to be billed to the big games, meaning – you get a chance to get hot and then you're ready to win those big games later in the year. Like if that's why you're playing freshmen now to build to win those games, then I'm cool with that. Right. But I think you should play younger kids if they are ready to play and help you win. The reason that I'm advocating for Tobias Merriweather is because he should be playing because he's too talented and the receiving corps has been too mediocre for him not to play. Yeah. Simple as that. You have not heard me saying, man, you got to get Tyson Ford in the game. This is BS. You got to play Tyson Ford more. You haven't heard me say that, right? You haven't heard me say, where the heck is Billy Strouth? You need to play Billy Strouth more. You haven't heard me say, hey, where's Donovan Heinich? You haven't heard there's been 3 freshman spots that I feel we should see guys. Tobias at receiver, the tight ends, right? Raritan and Stace kind of go together. And I think we should see more of Junior Tuihalamaka at middle linebacker or Jalen Sneed at rover. And I hope that we see that coming out of this game. I don't know if BYU is the game for either one of those guys, just because of how creative they are. They could take advantage of those young guys making big plays. We need to see it against Stanford, need to see it against UNLV and Syracuse, but not all freshmen. I'm not playing on. I mean, you already are seeing it in the secondary. I mean, you have 2 freshmen that are very key rotation players in the cornerback. And so I think the guys that I'm advocating for the younger kids, and I mean, there's some sophomores in there, but most of the sophomores are playing, right? There's some younger kids in there that need to play to help this team win, right? That's what I'm advocating for, is not to play to build for next year, but it's play to win these games. I think Tobias Merriweather gives you a chance to win these games. And so same thing with Junior, same thing with Jalen Sneed at times. Same thing with, I would be advocating for Benjamin Morrison if he wasn't playing Morris, because I think he can help you win games now. Same with Eli Raritan and Holden Stay. So, Connor, I really think it's important to win these games because you need to keep momentum on the recruiting trail and you need to keep building. And there's not a lot of guys that are done after this year. Yeah, there aren't, and so you don't want guys thinking that, hey, if I come back next year and things don't go our way, they're just going to bench me for a younger guy. Good luck trying to convince, Cam Hart and Brandon Joseph to come back in that instance, So, yeah, you play your best players. I just think my issue is that they're just not playing their best players. That's kind of been my thing on that, Ryan. Ryan, I knew this is going to make you smile because Michael Johnson said this, and Ryan has texted me and told me this like 3 or 4 times in the last 2 weeks. Michael says, I want Jeff Sims. This is a quarterback from Georgia Tech. I want Jeff Sims if he's in the portal, Ryan. I knew that I'd pull that up and that would make you happy.
Brian, I think that there's some Hendon Hooker to him if he enters the portal, man. Like, I really do. I think that we have not seen nearly as good as what Jeff Sims could be because he's just on a very bad situation. I really think he's talented, man. So if he ever entered the portal, and he's also a Georgia Tech kid, so I would think that academically he's pretty good, so that might be able to make the transfer work. But I mean, again, he's not even in the portal, so it's just a hypothetical at this point. But if Jeff Sims does enter the portal, if I was Notre Dame, I'd reach out. Yeah, absolutely, I would, 100%.
Yeah, I would not. I'd reach out because I think I'd talk to him. I just don't think he has the accuracy that I want in this offense. I don't think Tom Reese would have any clue how to use Jeff Sims appropriately. I don't.
I think that says so much about
But that's the reality, right? But that's the reality.
I'm not disagreeing necessarily.
I think that Jeff Sims has a really live arm and he's athletic. He's just never impressed me with his ability. He reminds me a lot of Ian Book. I just don't see him processing real quickly and effectively and efficiently. I think he can be really erratic as a thrower. Now you could say maybe he's not being coached well or all that. I just think that I don't know what he would bring that other than experience that you don't have with Tyler Buckner, except maybe he doesn't have the injury history, right? But I feel like if you're going to bring in a transfer quarterback, it needs to be a guy that you look and say, that guy's definitely better than what you have. And I just don't know if he's that guy. And I don't know who that guy is, Ryan. I mean, because you think it's Jeff Sims. I think it would be Tyler Van Dyke if he were to jump in the portal. You don't think it's Tyler. I mean, so there's all these kids are going to have flaws. Because if it's a guy that doesn't have flaws, it's either going to be a freshman or sophomore who can't go pro, who's a star, or it's going to be a veteran guy who's looking to kind of resurrect his career because things didn't quite go his way. And there's just there's just not a lot of guys like that. They got Jack Cohn because Paul Chris screwed up. I mean, that's the only reason they got Jack Cohn. So that's my only concern, Ryan, is I just don't know who that guy is going to be right now. And that's why I haven't spent a ton of time on it. But, to kind of answer another question, Irishman 7-1-4 says, I understand if you can't answer because of sources and stuff, but do you think Notre Dame will get a 2023 quarterback recruit or a grad transfer? I think the goal is to do both.
Yes, I agree. On that one.
Will they get either? I don't know. But I think the goal certainly is both, Ryan.
Someone just said Tyler Van Don't in the chat, which is pretty funny.
Yeah. Tyler Van Dyke was a really good football player last year. And he's to me, he's a product of, I'm not a big fan of Josh Gaddis. I've never been a fan of Josh Gaddis. You look at what Tyler Van Dyke did last year. If you put that kid on Notre Dame's roster, that's a really good football player and a really good team. And he fits what Tommy Rees likes to do, much more so than Jeff Sims does. And I think that has to be factored in because that is Notre Dame's offensive coordinator. So I want to address this too. This is, I think, a very inaccurate statement. Derek Calmer, appreciate you saying it, Derek, but he says, disagree that these polls don't mean anything. The committee sees it and uses it to rate wins and losses. No, they do not. The committee has always been very adamant that they do not care about those polls. They rate wins and losses based on how they evaluate teams, right? So am I saying the committee members don't glance at polls? Sure, they do. I would imagine that they do. But they do not use that. They use their own criteria to, once they sit down in late October and start making their rankings, they base it off of, they put together their top 25 and it's values off of that. So no, these things don't mean anything. And the reason we know that is because the committee is always very different in a lot of ways from the AP and the coaches polls. Like remember when BYU 2 years ago was a perfect example. BYU was really high in the coaches and AP poll, and then the first ranking came out, and ESPN almost lost their minds because of how low BYU was ranked. You remember that, Ryan, in 2020?
Yep.
And it's like, well, who has BYU beat?
Anybody that year, man.
Nobody. And the committee was like, we don't care what they think. The committee's always had some pretty big differences with the poll. So no, I don't think that I don't think it matters. It definitely doesn't matter when it comes to like where you can make a case, Derek, is maybe it matters for like the initial poll, but even then I don't think it. But once they have their own ranking, that's what they base it off of is those kind of things. So that's kind of how I look at it, All right. So Tristan Paul says, I feel like if Notre Dame comes out flat and loses tomorrow, we have a coaching problem. Definitely very telling day. That's a pretty dark way of looking at the game, but I mean, it does show that they have a coaching problem right now, right? I mean, I don't think you would necessarily disagree with that. I think the question would be, is there any chance for a long-term problem, or is it more of just this current staff needs some tweaking after the season? I think that would be the bigger question for me.
Yeah, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about it right now. I mean, Tristan, I think, again, if with every potential loss, there is going to be a moment where you're like, okay, what is the overall state of this program? What does this loss mean? And every loss, I think, means something differently. But I agree with you that if they come out of the bye week after having some momentum entering and then they lay a goose egg against BYU, there is some issue there. There is 100% an issue. Now, is it long-term issue? Is it something that can be remedied? I'm not really sure about it. I have to take that one step at a time, but I do think that you're on par with like, hey, that's a eye-opening, like, what the heck is happening right now type of thing if they lay a goose egg tomorrow.
Ryan B said they were talking about Cal's only UNLV being the only loss for Cal's the only loss for UNLV, and then Ryan B said yes, Cal is their loss. We were one pass away from losing to. That pass would have tied the game, unless Cal would have gone for 2. That would have only tied the game. So they were not a pass away from tying or losing. They were a pass away from tying in a game that Notre Dame dominated the second half. I mean, they did. We also have a here. So Beefeater says, Brian, any chance of an IB meetup in Syracuse? That's definitely something to consider. Part of it's going to depend on when kickoff is, because Ryan and I will both be in town for that game. Yep. So just as we get closer, when we find out what time kickoff is, it'll determine, because I'm actually driving. I'm not flying in for that game. It's like about a 7.5 hour drive. So I actually decided it'd be a lot cheaper, and it was, to get a rental car and just drive, just shoot on over. So I'll be driving to that game. I think, Ryan, you'll be driving up for it as well, right?
I will be. Yep.
So it just depends on what time the game is. Because if the game's like an afternoon or noon game, it'll be hard, because I probably won't be getting until Friday night. Maybe we can try something Friday night or Saturday. But once we find out what time kickoff is, Beefeater, bring this back up again, and we'll be able to solidify some plans. I'm always down to meet some people. So there's no doubt. And then, since Ryan will be there as well.
Yep.
Brent Smith asks, how would you classify the Notre Dame offense? Pro West Coast? I think it's a pro style spread offense. Would you agree with that, Ryan?
100%. Yep.
I think at times it's just pure pro style. Like when they are really heavy on 12 personnel, it's just flat out pro style. Mm-hmm. I think since Tom Maurice took over, it's been more just pro style. I think under Chip Long, it was more a pro style spread.
Yeah.
I think under Tom Maurice, it's been more just pro style. Would you agree with that?
I agree. I mean, I think, but I like to. He said West Coast. Like, there's West Coast elements, sure. But that's every offense.
Every NFL offense has some West Coast emphasis to it. Everyone. Yep. I mean, Alabama's. I mean, Sark is a West Coast guy. There's elements to what he does. That's partly why Sark doesn't like stop routes.
Yes,
because the West Coast offense used very few stop routes. It was a lot of movement stuff. And that's kind of where that philosophy came from. Exactly. So somebody said spread. It's not a spread offense. A spread offense, there's two ways to use the word spread. One is your offense just spreads people out formationally. The spread offense is a legitimate, like, you can point to philosophical principles that are part of a spread offense. And Clemson was very much a spread offense. It's going to have a lot of quarterback read stuff. You're going to use a lot of spread stuff, a lot of perimeter screens. It's going to have a lot of those type of principles in them that are going to kind of fit that. So yes, spread is, and Notre Dame is not that team. They're not that team. They've always been pro style since really they were a spread offense. There was a time they were a spread offense, sort of. Brian Kelly's first, I'd say, 3 years at Notre Dame, they were kind of a spread offense. Ran a lot of G scheme, they were pin and pull. The first 2 years, they were a pin and pull team. They didn't have a running quarterback, but they would do read zone with Dane Chris. I mean, that's the play he got hurt on against Michigan, I believe, was pulling on a read zone back in 2010. So they were definitely a spread then, but they have gone more to pro style. The transition started in 2012, and from 13 on, it was very much a pro style team. They were more pro style spread under Chip Long because he liked to do G scheme and buck sweep and throw some of the RPO stuff, things like that. But Tyler Smith with a super chat says, thank you, Tyler, for that. Was listening to 97.1 The Fan here in Ohio, and they think Ryan Day is going to have to get a QB in the portal because they haven't been playing McCord. He would be soiled to get if he would be soiled to get if he would be okay. He'd be a big pickup if they get him. Solid. Okay. I don't know what you're trying to say there, buddy, but I just don't see Kyle McCord not leaving. Like, why would he leave? Like, he's not going to leave during the season. That'd be dumb, right? But CJ Stroud's going to be a top 5 pick next year. Like, CJ Stroud's not coming back. You're going to walk right into this situation, Ohio State. You're going to have 2 to 3 years left to play. Why would he leave Ohio State? Because he's not playing this year. He's not playing behind a guy who's who's older than him. I don't understand why he would leave, Ryan. He's a redshirt freshman right now, correct?
Yeah.
So he'll have 3 years left after this. So it wouldn't make any sense to me. I think Ohio State fans just like to say crap to get clickbait and stuff like the whole thing about the Brian Hartline and categorically denying he'd be the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. Why are we talking about this? Why is this even something we're talking about? Oh, you guys don't have enough to. Oh, I get it. You guys are playing Rutgers every week and Toledo every week, and so nobody cares about what you're talking about because your schedule sucks since the Notre Dame game. So you got to have something to talk about. So there we go. I guess that's maybe why they're talking about it. I'd be shocked if Kyle McCord left because of playing time, because he's going to walk right into that job. Do you think he's worried about Devin Brown beating him out? No, he is not. He is not. I can assure you of that. So anyway, that's my take on this game. So I think, Ryan, that's a good place to end it. It's a good place to end it. But yes, I'll say this. If Kyle McCord did go to the portal and was interested in Notre Dame, heck to the yes on whether or not I would want him. And Notre Dame, there's no doubt. That kid is incredibly talented. Incredibly talented. So anyway, Ryan, that's going to do it. Great show today. Tons of fun. Great analysis from you today. Had a lot of fun in the mailbag today. Very, very much. Somebody asked if we're coming out to California. I will not be coming to California for the USC game. Ryan will not be either. I am trying to get somebody out there, potentially one of my West Coast guys, potentially going to that game, but we won't be at that game this year. So anyway, for Ryan Roberts, I'm Brian Driscoll. Hit that like button, everybody. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell. Share this podcast. Leave us a 5-star review. 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning. IB countdown to kickoff with Sean Stires and Vince Dario. And of course, about 20 minutes after the game, since I'm not going to be at the game, we're going to get started with the post-game show about 20 minutes after the game. So we will definitely be ready to rock and roll on that. So lots of action coming up, everybody. So join the Irish Breakdown message boards.irishbreakdown.com for the latest news, notes, and discussion about Notre Dame football. Have a great rest of your Friday, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.